first round of that came in about 20 minutes ago. I don't know whether you noticed that at all, Will. Is he there?
I did not notice that because I'm too.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that Lib Dem got 39,500 votes, and John Biggs for Labour got 27,000.
Tower Hamlets.
Sorry, I said Hackney? I meant to say Tower Hamlets. You're indeed correct, Tim. And yes, it was 39,500 plays. Well, more or less 28,000 for Labour. And this is one of these things where the top two go through and then everybody else's second preference comes into it. And according to the man at Smarkets, who we rate as a very good judge of these things and understands all this stuff, he said that Labour would need in the region of an 85% to 15% split on the second preferences to take it, assuming that everybody that has a second preference uses it. And he thought that made it extremely unlikely that Labour could win that one. Although, as I remember, in a previous time when Lib Dem stood as mayor in Tower Hamlets many years ago, almost nobody gave him the second preference. He was quite popular. The people that liked him really liked him, but the people that didn't like him were not prepared to give an inch to him. So I don't know. I can't. It feels like Labour are in a bit of trouble there anyway.
The politics of Tower Hamlets are pretty difficult and complex.
Yeah, it's complex for sure. Yeah.
And it's not the normal left-right split either. So I guess we just have to wait and see for that one.
Yeah, I don't know much about the Labour candidate there.
I think John's been a good mayor, but I think Lib Dem was always going to be a difficult opponent. And obviously his big comeback after being disqualified.
Happening now. Is anyone in there still?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, guys, you carry on. You carry on. Bring me in when necessary.
Sorry, Paul. I was reading Twitter for a sec just to make sure I was
managing a golf
up to date with stuff.
There's a lot still going on, so just bear with me. I'm here. I'm listening, and I'll dive in when necessary. All right.
God, that tie is absolutely hideous. What are you doing, William?
Will, have you slept yet, mate?
No.
You're just hardcore.
Well, that isn't strictly speaking true, is it?
Oh God, I fell asleep. I fell asleep in the morning and I had to be woken up by. Was it you, Neil, who woke me up, or was it?
Yeah, it was basically the Welsh. They noticed you were asleep, and we had a little chuckle, and then you sort of, kind of, you did that thing of sort of rolling your neck when you sort of. You were sleeping while sitting bolt upright, and your neck doesn't support when you're asleep, does it? So you did that kind of rag doll thing that people do, and then woke yourself up. It was fairly amusing. The Welsh people loved it. They thought it was the funniest thing ever.
Them the Star Spangled Gamblers. They give me and Shadsy awards for lifetime services to political betting.
I've never heard of them. Who are they?
The Americans. They've got Star Spangled Gamblers.
It's a great podcast.
I need to search that on Twitter, guys. Star Spangled Gamblers.
Yeah, you need an award, Will. Superb effort, this, mate. Absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much. That means an awful lot, and I'm very, very touched.
I'll have to have a look now.
Right, I think we're ready to get rocking and rolling. So, let's get rocking and rolling. So we are back for our second local lectures live stream. I don't think this one will go 12 hours, but you never know. Joined by the estimable Johnny Ward, who is on my left. He may not be on your left. And our returning guests from last night, Neil Channing and Paul Critchard from the polling station, and former Labour press officer Tim Carter was good enough to grace us with his presence. And we're dealing with an awful lot more data, including some returns from Northern Ireland. So Johnny Ward, get stuck in.
Yeah, I think just looking here at the moment, Sinn Féin have had a very good election so far. In terms of the returns right now, Sinn Féin have 25.8% of the vote, DUP 22.8%. But bizarrely enough, William, in terms of seats, it's 14 confirmed Sinn Féin seats, 2 for the DUP. So Sinn Féin have effectively had a very, very good election in terms of just putting candidates, placing their candidates right. The DUP will be reliant on transfers, which is very, very interesting to see how it works out, because the UUP haven't had a particularly good election. The SDLP haven't had a particularly good election. And strangely enough, neither unionism nor nationalism has had a particularly good election, because the nationalist vote is slightly down. The unionist vote is down. Alliance is taken from both. And effectively, the only party that one should be voting for here is probably the Green Party, because we're all screwed, and they've actually hardly polled at all. It's a very, very interesting election. The big winners for me are Sinn Féin and Alliance, but the Sinn Féin surge in terms of nationalism, I'm not so sure about, because the nationalism vote has actually gone down.
Well, very concise indeed. Anybody else, any thoughts to offer on Northern Ireland?
Good result for the Alliance, right? That's what I'm hearing. Just the Alliance seems to be cutting through the old sectarian divide.
Yeah, essentially, so a lot of people are going to the middle, because in Northern Ireland you're somehow deemed to be one or the other, even though, like in the Republic, a lot of people now basically were either born after the 1994 IRA ceasefire in effect. So like that's nearly 30 years ago, and they don't really care about this stuff. They also see that the government hasn't been functioning and MLAs have been paid to do nothing effectively, and they want Naomi Long's party in the middle. I suppose, unfortunately, Paul, the Greens don't seem to have capitalized on that. They've struggled, but I'm all for the Alliance doing well. But it's not been a good election for the DUP. Only 2 elected at the moment, and ironically, they could be reliant in some place on transfers from Aontú being a nominally sort of pro All Ireland, pro United Ireland party, splinter from Sinn Féin, but quite conservative in terms of abortion and things like that. And some Aontú transfers seem to possibly be going the way of the DUP, but transfers are going to be interesting. Jeffrey Donaldson will possibly have a long face, even longer than he normally has tonight.
So what happens next? I mean, never mind, the party balance, but literally what happens next with the Northern Ireland Protocol? I mean, I see that there is talk that the British government are now becoming a bit more pragmatic and realising they can't just blow it up because they want to. There will be a price to pay. But what will happen? Will the DUP accept that Sinn Féin have won and they have a right to form a government, have a First Minister?
Yeah, that will be interesting, because Jeffrey Donaldson wouldn't be drawn on that pre-election, which I thought was actually quite disgraceful, because the protocol is entirely, if you want to blame anyone for the protocol, it's nothing to do with Sinn Féin. It's effectively the DUP actually backed Brexit, which to me was one of the most insane things for anyone in Northern Ireland. But by hook or by crook, actually, the Northern Ireland situation within the new kind of post-Brexit era isn't so bad. And ultimately, the stuff about the protocol is fairly trivial. Most people don't care about the protocol, and it's actually bringing Northern Ireland into 2 markets, so they're doing okay. But at the same time, I think what'll happen, Paul, to be honest, is that there'll be minor adjustments to the protocol, very, very minor things. The DUP will claim that as a victory and try to get on from this election, because the DUP face an uncertain future, in the sense that there are a lot of dinosaurs effectively that young people won't vote for. The protocol isn't of any concern to them. It's healthcare, the cost of living, and so on and so forth. And the DUP haven't been much good to them because they haven't even been in Stormont.
I mean, just culturally, just generally, it's how are they going to deal? How is that strand of extreme unionism going to deal with the fact that Sinn Féin have the First Minister? I'm not professing to be in touch, but I've studied Northern Ireland in the past. I remember the first 5-10 years of the Assembly and after the Good Friday Agreement, and it was just them closing down Stormont over anything, trying to find a new excuse every 10 minutes to blow up the peace agreement, so to speak. I mean, are they going to accept that? And of course, then you have the question: will the Conservative Party stand up to them?
Mm. I don't know, because it's a strange election. If you're I think if you're a unionist in Northern Ireland at the moment, personally, I don't think the union particularly does all that well for Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is effectively a failed state. But at the same time, this election isn't all that worrying, because if people are moving towards alliance, which they are, alliance, while it's kind of agnostic on the United Ireland question, in general, the nationalist vote isn't actually increasing at all. So the SDLP have had a disappointing election. So the DUP should probably put up and shut up and realize that in order to lead unionism, they probably need to be pragmatic, because older people will die and pass away a bit like the Conservatives, and younger people are not going to vote for the DUP if they're not actually doing anything for their well-being. And this election is more about the common interests of young people on the ground and people in general in Northern Ireland, who, as Naomi Long have said, have had a pretty shit time of it for the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And you've got, I mean, you know, a lot of it also comes down to the paramilitaries and whether they're going to get peace money, and whether, and you know, I'm quite sure for certain interests involved in this, not just Northern Irish interests, I'm quite sure the idea of a never-ending border standoff is a dream come true, right? Smuggling. I mean, it's fascinating. It's fascinating because I just want to. I mean, look, the power ultimately lies with the British government. Because if the British government say we accept this, you know, Sinn Féin have won the election, they have a right to form the First Minister, they have a right to form administration. There's absolutely nothing DUP can do, right? Mm-hmm. In the past, they have always relied on London reimposing home rule whenever it suits them, right? It does seem to me that at this point in time, that would be a ridiculous thing for our government to do. But, you know, this is the government that did a hard Brexit and brought this state of affairs to happen, you know.
Well, but Boris Johnson, like, knew what they were doing when they accepted the protocols. They haven't a leg to stand on in this. And I mean, there are issues with the protocol for unionists, but in the overall scheme of things, you'll know from my regular listens here, and I'm becoming a militant on this, but ultimately I think, apart from the onset of climate change and how catastrophic that is, everything else is secondary. But even if you take that out of it, what Northern Ireland people are finding is that they need a functioning government because of the health service and because of the cost of living, and because effectively, you know, people are on about half the salaries that they're on in the south. Now, it's comparing apples and oranges to some respects, but the protocol really is only a minor thing, and many businesses see the benefit of the protocol in terms of what it can do. And Northern Ireland, bizarrely, been in effectively having access to the EU and the UK market is the best of both worlds in many people's eyes. The protocol really, as much as ironically UUP, who are essentially have been mild on the protocol, they haven't had a great election. For the average voter, the protocol is neither here nor there. So the DUP, for me, if the DUP don't accept going into government with Sinn Féin, and bear in mind the Deputy First Minister and First Minister are the same thing, it's basically just nominal, the difference. It's a sectarian refusal, and going back to the old days of, you know, Protestant state for Protestant people. If they don't accept the mandate of the people, then they have some serious questions to answer, I think.
Do you think there'll be a border poll?
Do you think there'll be a border poll? Absolutely not. I mean, and like, there's no coincidence at all that Michelle O'Neill, I think one of her lines was that people don't wake up in the morning thinking about a border poll of United Ireland. And she said that for a reason, because the border poll is basically it's a load of fluff at this stage. There was no mandate in this election for a border poll, whatever. In essence, United Ireland, in my view, will happen if Scotland breaks away from the UK. Then a United Ireland, I think, is probably an odds-on shot. But at the moment, as I said, the vote for nationalism and a vote for alliance is not a vote for a border poll. The nationalist vote here is, I could be wrong, the nationalist vote is give or take about 30%, or less. So that's nowhere near enough for a border poll. And I don't think Sinn Féin will be. It's telling, I think, that Sinn Féin were quite nuanced in their electioneering this time. They were fairly quiet on anything because they knew the DUP was screwing up, so they just kept quiet, and they were very, very quiet in the border poll stuff the closer it got to polling time.
Really interesting back and forth there. Just moving on to English results. Tim, there's a lot of talk about Labour Party performances, and we've had quite a bit of water under the bridge. How do you rate the Labour Party's performance so far?
Good in parts. I think that for me, it wasn't as good as I wanted. However, I do think it is quite a step on from 2018. We have to look at 2018 as the equivalent elections, whether I like it or not. It's what they are. So, for instance, 74 seats were gained in 2018. We've actually built on that by gaining, last time I looked, it was about 52. But in 2018, we didn't take any councils, and we've probably taken 6, possibly 7. And those councils aren't just London, although Wandsworth and that's what you Stavro, and you got Barnet and Westminster. You also got Crawley, Rosendale, Worthing, Cumberland, and then you look at Dudley, which a lot of people look at as, you know, the Midland seat. We actually have pulled back 2 seats, and that's been a very difficult area for us in recent years. And also, there's places like Rosendale in Lancashire, where again Labour have gained control of the council now. Rosendale was a 1992 parliamentary gain, and we lost it in 2010. So all that is progress. So what I would say is Labour now, what Starmer has managed to do since he became leader. When he became leader, people obviously weren't listening to us, they weren't looking at us, or if they were, they didn't like what they saw. And what he's managed to do, and I use the analogy of a shop on the high street. So everyone's got a butcher's they go to, they go into it, and they know there's another butcher, but they're just used to this butcher because the guy who sells the meat's popular. But they're getting a bit worried about what he's selling them. And what Starmer's done is convinced me enough to actually step inside his shop, whereas before they're walking past and maybe and actually having a conversation and some look at what he's got, or what Labour Party have got. So I think he's positioned Labour in a place where now, what are we, 2 years out from a general election probably, people are giving Labour the benefit of the doubt and actually start saying, well, hang on, what are they saying? What is the alternative? Because I do think people are fed up. And then you have to compare that with the Tory result. And I think this is really interesting. So obviously every party before an election will come out and tell you it's going to be awful. So the Tories came out and were briefing 800 seat losses. No, I don't think anyone really believed that, but that controlled the narrative for a few days. And then it's clear they're expecting losses. But more interestingly, the Daily Mail then printed a graphic of what they saw were good and bad results. And absolute disaster territory for the Tories was 270 losses in England. And when I looked, it was 279. So whilst Labour haven't made a massive breakthrough, they've actually at least got back on the pitch and are being competitive. And the Tories are in a real hole, because whilst they're losing seats like Worthing and Rosendale to Labour, they're also being attacked by the Lib Dems, and the Greens are also taking seats. So there is no place for them to go. And I think coming out of these elections, once things calm down in a couple of days, you know, over the weekend with Tory MPs talking to their constituency chairs and everything like that, I think people will recognise exactly, that's the, people will recognise exactly what a mess the Tories are in. And this is not a midterm blues. This is an election result of a government that I think is just out of ideas, and the electorate have started looking elsewhere. And that will not change with the current leader.
Tim, that's totally consistent with what we were saying, I think, going into the election, that how does Boris get back from this? I can't see how he reforms the narrative, given the by-elections. They were absolutely decimated today. His own kind of, I think his own image has really taken a massive hit. Like, surely the game is up for him.
Yeah, well, I think it's an image problem, but I was listening, watching him today, when he came out and he was saying how sad it was to lose some councillors, but hey, it was great we held this. I just don't think he gets it. I don't think he understands. I think it's just his temporary blip. It's all about Partygate, and people will soon move on because he, vaccine rollout, he did well. He's not doing a bad job with supporting Ukraine, and I think he believes that will get him through. I don't think he's anywhere near understand the cost of living crisis. And also, I don't think he really understands the real anger in the country. And you had the Tory leader of Worcester Council last night walking out the count before the results were declared. And okay, so they lost 2 councillors. And he was clear who it blames. And what we have is a succession of Conservative ministers appearing on the TV, either downplaying the losses, which I guess they'd have to, or saying, well, do you know what, these are difficult times, and we knew there'll be bad results. I don't think they did really know that at all. And the truth is, they could do much, much more with the cost of living crisis. They haven't yet. They've had plenty of time since October. The warnings were there. So, yeah, I don't think he's got an idea. My view on Johnson is he's a pretty awesome campaigner. And, you give him a slogan and send him in a van around the country, people are going to flock to him and listen to him because he's quite entertaining. But when it comes down to delivery and real politics and leadership, I don't think he's anywhere near it. And and that's why he can't come back. If he was a good leader and had just had a bad spell, he could come back. Whereas with Starmer, on the other hand, I don't think that Starmer's a natural campaigner. I don't think he's a great media performer, but I do think he's a solid politician, and he will plod his way through steadily. And also, there's that element that when you compare the two, and put them side by side, I think people are starting to see that one actually is a leader, and one is just a showman.
I think that there's a lot of truth in what you said. Now, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of what Johnson is capable of doing and what he can't do, which is pretty much everything when it comes to administration. But just on the Starmer point regarding campaign, I'd be interested to know how much of a problem you think the reopening of the Durham Beergate case is, and what happens if he was to get a fine, hypothetically.
Right. So I think that there's 3 things. The story actually has been around for months and months and months. The first time I saw it was middle of December, or towards the end of December, on a left-wing blog called Squawk Box, a Corbyn supporting blog that really dislikes Starmer. It didn't break through. Tried again in January. There's a bit of a story in February, and all of a sudden it happens during election week. Now, Starmer's said what he said, and he's absolutely adamant he didn't break the rules. And the police are investigating. We're a party that supports law and order. And what we might say, do you know what? This is a hatchet job by the Mail and pressure from the Tories. The police have decided to reopen investigation. And that's right. We now just have to wait, and Starmer will cooperate. Now, the speculation that he resigned, I don't think there is an equivalent between the 2 cases. But it's an interesting thing. If I was just to say that if there was a fixed penalty notice issued, and it arrived, and Starmer said, do you know what? My honesty and decency says I've got to resign. Johnson is even in more trouble. Yeah. So this isn't a gift for the Tories. And also, there's these other Met Police investigations going on all the time. So I honestly don't think this is a gift for the Tories, and I think that a few people in the Tory party, not journalists, because journalists report news and they run with stories, and it's a legitimate thing to do. But I think a lot of Tory MPs are going to wake up in a week's time and think, oh my God, what have we done? Because Durham police come back and say, do you know what, we've reinvestigated, and the rules in place at the time were obeyed. No rules were broken. There is no fixed penalty notice. Johnson then gets another 2 fixed penalty notices, and you know what happens. It's back on him. And I think this was probably an attack that he thought, this will take cost of living off the front pages for local elections. It might give us some cover when the next fixed penalty notices arrive, if they do. I just don't think they've thought it through. And I think as long as Starmer, what he said holds, and the police find that that's true, there's guidelines in the law, I don't think there's a problem. I don't think him resigning comes into it. But if in this hypothetical situation it does, and he says, hey, I said all along, you can't be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker, I'm going, then Johnson's finished.
Yeah, well, can I just say, I think if we're still in a normal universe, that's completely right. All I would, and I, my analysis for all of this is that he will go this year. This series of events, the local elections being the first, will finish him, and the by-elections really are the one. Although all I would say is, it's deeply sinister that they've been able to do this. The former head of Durham Police said yesterday before the elections how disturbing it was that the police could be bullied like that, used the political football for electoral gain. All I'll say is, this thing around Boris Johnson isn't just Boris Johnson; it's an entirely corrupt network that is behind it.
I think you're right. It wasn't just one party, and the pattern of behaviour. There was denials. There was everything attached to it. And I have to be careful here, because I was one of the people who wrote to my MP and urged her to write to the Met Police to open investigations into Boris Johnson. So, was that political pressure? I'd say no. I'd say that was me as a constituent, absolutely outraged. I'd watched friends in dire situations during lockdown, and I was really, really angry. So, yeah, I'm guilty of that.
But my point is really that the forces around Boris Johnson will stop at nothing to keep him in place. It is relentless. What's got absolutely no attention was that Parliament voted to force him to release the Lib Dem papers before Parliament closed, before the elections, and they just ignored it. And no one's doing anything.
Well, he's got a record.
Right, he's going to carry on. And the fact that they would do this, the fact that they would try this, is sinister. And it just tells me they are going to throw everything at this. They are going to do everything to save their skins. And my only worry, I think, as I say, in a normal universe, he's finished. He's finished. They're going to get slaughtered in the by-elections. And, if there's in a normal universe, the Conservative Party wakes up to what they've done and gets rid of him and picks someone else, starts again. But, are we in that world anymore? It's very Donald Trump, isn't it? Very Donald Trump.
I think there is a thing. I don't think that, I don't believe there's this grand circle of people around Johnson in some sinister conspiracy to keep him in power. I do think the political world he operates in is dirty. I do think that he personally would do almost anything to stay in power, but I don't think there's this circle of people. Now, what would they?
I really do.
And I listen. I've got a lot of friends who say to me, "Tim, you're mad. Can't you see what's happening?" And I sort of, and maybe it's because I don't want to believe it's true. I'm still in that place, but I have shifted. I just thought he was a bad politician. Now I actually think that he's morally corrupt, and that's a huge step for me. But the next bit on that then is, if it gets to about what happens next. And I was saying this, I think this morning, that let's be under no mistake here. Once Labour become credible, the Tories are going to unleash everything on us. Now, those of us who remember the 80s, those of us who remember, pre-95, when Blair was first leader, and he did not have an easy ride in the first 6 months or even 2 years, demonized, stuff like that, through that. So, eventually the media, I think, partly because they saw, the Sun especially, they saw that he was going to win, sort of jumped in behind him. I don't think they won it. But I think people sometimes forget exactly how nasty politics can be.
It's going to be. We know this is a network. It's an international network. It's the same thing with Donald Trump, and they are going to play the Muslim grooming gangs thing, the Jimmy Savile thing. They will play as dirty as they can.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
And I'm not saying I don't think that's working personally. I think if that was working, then they wouldn't be in the trouble they're in.
I think if it wasn't Starmer, and it was someone who had deep character flaws like the last leader, for instance, and awful foreign policies and things like that, and friends, I think it does work. But with Starmer, yes, there are sections on the internet where these things spread, but I think with the public, they actually do see a decent person, and that will get him through. That will get him through a lot. The real danger on that for Labour is not to get involved where we don't need to get involved. And over the last week or so, I've almost howled at Twitter at friends when they started arguing with journalists about Durham and this, that, and the other. And I just said, just don't argue about it. There's one or two things that's going to happen. It's going to die, or the police are going to make a decision to reopen investigations. And you screaming on Twitter is just bringing to more and more people's attention. And the more attention it gets, the more the newspapers are going to print it or run it, the more coverage it's going to get. And what you end up feeding the beast.
Yeah, that's the tactic, isn't it? It's deliberate.
Yes, and that is a very real tactic. So the thing is, pick what you hit back at. So there was a very old line, a boss of mine years back. I phoned him. I just we're getting lots of complaints here. Why aren't we responding to this? And he said, Tim, would you really put out a statement saying Labour candidate denies his bank robber? And I thought for a minute, actually, no, I wouldn't, because then the question is, what's that story about? Who said you're a bank robber? Or if you haven't robbed a bank, have you robbed a newsagent? Have you robbed this? And before you know it, all you're talking about is what you've robbed or haven't robbed, and the story that you should have ignored is suddenly front page news.
Yeah,
I think that's what we have to be careful of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating insights. Can I quickly take us to Scotland? Virtually, of course, because we've got the final seat totals from Scotland. The SNP first home with 453 councillors, I believe. That's a jump of 62 on last time. Labour second, clear second, up 40 with 282. The Tories lost 44 in Scotland. They have 214. Independents, I don't know who exactly, 152. They lost 80 seats. The Lib Dems, 20, again, 20 for 87, and 16 for the Greens, who are in partnership with the SNP in that coalition. And I don't really want to sound mean, but it's sort of hilarious to see Alba have nothing. Just absolutely.
Be as mean as you want, Will. Be as mean as you want, I will be.
Absolutely nothing for Alba, a loss of 15. Just a terrible outing for them. Overall council totals, no overall control, 27. 2 were basically brought into overall control. One went to Labour, one went to the SNP. So that's Scotland in. Very good times for Labour and the SNP in Scotland. I'll tell you what, Anna Sarr will have Keir Starmer feeling a bit better, won't he?
Yeah, I think he'll be very, very happy tonight. Labour moving up into second. It's our best performance probably in 10 years. It's a real turnaround, and it does make it look like there are parliamentary seats in Scotland that Labour can start winning again. And people have often said there's no route back to Westminster government without parliamentary seats in Scotland. And to be second place in the share of votes and second place in the number of seats, things like that, I think is a very important thing. But again, it is the beginning. This is the start of a journey into government. We're nowhere near finished yet, and there's a lot of work to be done. So what we can't do is look at Scotland and say, yep, fantastic, job done, and stop. We have to keep moving and and keep pushing and winning back votes.
I think that also not so much. I mean, I think the Scotland thing is exactly encouraging a little bit. They do look like they'll win a few seats back there, but the Lib Dem results in the South are tremendous for Labour. Again, I do think there is a real chance now of building this sort of nationwide pincer movement to get rid of the Tories. There will be. You don't have to have a formal deal. You don't have to have a formal deal. You just need to sensibly not try in certain places, not attack each other. And there's a lot of room for common ground. If we are looking at a sort of progressive coalition next time round, well, you focus on a better Brexit deal. Lib Dems have already got policy on that can be moulded around will suit both parties. Reversing the electoral laws, reversing the protest laws, all of that stuff. There's an agenda there. The Tories have gone so far. This Johnson government has gone so far to the right and to an authoritarian position that there is real scope now, I think, for Labour and the Lib Dems to do this across the country.
Absolutely. Just quickly, sorry, last word for Johnny Ward. He has to dash. Closing thoughts, and thanks very much for giving us a moment of your time.
Yeah, it was interesting, William, when I was in Wandsworth last week, and obviously met you in the constituency. And RT, the state broadcaster, did one clip in advance of the election here when I came back, and it was from Wandsworth, and it was literally outside my hotel. But they did, Wandsworth Council, I see, has actually declared a climate emergency. And I wonder, is this like the last election in Britain where maybe it won't be as... It'll be a kind of a peripheral issue, when I do hope that politics will soon realize how bad this is going to be and just get rid of this nonsense about green and orange in Northern Ireland. And this is the last election where green and orange is such a binary choice in Northern Ireland. I think we're moving away from that. I know the Greens didn't do well, but I hope globally in Britain and in Ireland we do start copping on to our impending destruction and just decide that we need to do something about this.
Well, the Greens have gained everywhere, hand over fist, and it's not limited just to one.
Except Northern Ireland.
Except Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and ironically, the Greens and the green third of the flag, and this horrible green and orange binary choice. The green, it wasn't a great result for nationalism, as much as it's amazing that Sinn Féin is topping the poll. If you delve into this, and I hope in the south and in the north, because the north hasn't. The Green Party in the south is doing okay. It didn't do particularly well in the north in this election, and I wonder when they will cop onto that, when the middle ground and everyone will realise that Belfast could soon be basically prone to flooding like everywhere else unless we cop ourselves on.
Just quickly, before you go, how environmentally focused or how environmentally strong is the Sinn Féin manifesto? Do they pay a lot of attention to that?
They're appalling. They're absolutely appalling on Sinn Féin in the south have basically taken on the government on carbon tax. They've taken them on in terms of the turf cutting. Sinn Féin is atrocious on climate change. And it galls me to say that they're by clear top party in the south now on that basis. And even Michelle O'Neill, who I actually have a good time for, the stuff she spoke about today in terms of delivering when she got elected, no mention of climate whatsoever. It's absolutely grim. Maybe it's out of our control, but at the same time, be conscious of the fact that this isn't about our children and about their children. It's about us, because it's coming down the tracks anytime soon. And Sinn Féin don't care. And sadly, it seems the population don't really care either, because they're voting them top of the poll, north and south.
Indeed. Any other questions for Johnny before he goes?
Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed listening to you, Tim. The other of you degenerates I know too well, but really enjoyed it.
Next time you're in Wandsworth, give me a shout. I'm only a couple of miles down the road.
Oh, I will. And William will be there as well.
Yes, that's it. We'll take it to Churchill's.
All the best.
Righto. Neil, I haven't heard too much from you so far. What do you make of the overall Labour performance? I'll run over the Welsh stuff then, and to all of you in the comments, I will get to you. But we've got lots of results to get through, and I just want to give a brief overview before we start getting into the comments, the back and forth. But Neil, your thoughts, and also some news: Luther Rathman has now been officially elected Mayor of Tower Hamlets. How time flies.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. To be honest, I've found the whole process of this election massively depressing. I hear people talking about honesty in politics. I hear people talking about integrity, and quite rightly attacking Boris Johnson, who, you know, can't string a sentence together without lying at least twice. But I think the dishonesty from the Labour Party over this result is equally bad, really. And if you want to stand as an honest party, you have to be honest. I'm just looking at a headline from the Times when these elections were last fought in 2018. And, you know, there was a succession of headlines at the time saying, you know, Corbyn needs to go. These results are awful. It shows he can't break through. Labour being failed, blah, blah, blah. And now all I've heard since these results have come out in the last 12 hours, MPs call for inquest as Corbyn fails election test. Apparently, though, 2018 was a high watermark for Labour, and it was very difficult for Labour to make ground last night. Why can't somebody just be honest for once in politics? If you're going to stand as an honest person, and for Keir Starmer to stand up and stand as an honest person when he won the Labour leadership by saying that he was effectively going to run on the same policies of Corbyn, but just be more professional about it, and he was going to unite the party. He hasn't done any of that. I think it's an absolute outrage. I think he's the worst Labour leader I've seen in my lifetime. And if he resigns over this, even if it means that a worse right-wing leader comes in, I'll be delighted to see him go. I think he's a terrible politician. I don't think he's an honest person. I don't know where you get the idea that the public think he's a nice man. His personal ratings are appalling. They're worse than Corbyn's were at this stage. And the sooner Labour get rid of him, the better. If he was calling he was calling for people to resign because they were being investigated by the police, not because they got the fines. He said it was a disgrace and that it was shaming the country that Boris Johnson was being investigated by the police, and now he's being investigated by the police. I think he's a hypocrite. I think that if you're going to be a hypocrite, don't be sanctimonious about it. And if you are a sanctimonious hypocrite, you've painted yourself into a corner. If he gets a fine over this, he has to quit. And if he doesn't, well, you know, how is he any better than Boris Johnson? And you don't have to say to me, well, Boris Johnson was having parties every night and they were ABBA-themed ones, and Keir Starmer was, you know, had been working really hard and it was a team meeting. I understand all of that, but the rules didn't have little addendums for that kind of thing. And this guy was the Director of Public Prosecutions at a time when a man who had only been to the country of his birth up until the age of 3 was deported for licking an ice cream when he was walking past a looted ice cream shop in the riots, and somebody else did 2 years in prison for stealing a bottle of water. This man made the laws. He was alongside the people that voted for these laws, and if he's broken the law, to me, I don't think Partygate is as important as all that. But I do think that you can't be sanctimonious about it with Boris Johnson, and then when you're caught, there's no way he can escape this. If he gets a fine, he has to go. I don't think it's been a good night for Labour. And I think, you know, we are a betting podcast, and one of the best ways you can judge how things have gone when the situation looks cloudy is to look at the betting. So let's have a look at the betting. If we have a look at the departure year for Boris Johnson, so 24 hours ago, Boris Johnson to depart the scene in 2022 was a 47% chance. It's now roughly a 36% chance. So Boris Johnson has had a good night in that respect. Boris Johnson to depart the scene 2024 or later, 24 hours ago, was a 45% chance. It's now a 48% chance. So even though Boris Johnson, clearly the Tories have had a poor night, and so they've lost quite a lot of seats, but the gains have obviously been to the Greens and the Lib Dems. Labour have had some gains, and they've done well in certain places. They did well in London. Westminster was a surprise for sure. The other two were quite expected in Barnet and Wandsworth. Worthing was not as expected as Barnet and Wandsworth, but it's been building that way over the years. I think Labour sort of did all right in some places, and it is a curate's egg. They did okay in some places. I'm sure they'll be pretty horrified that they lost in Humberside in Hull. But I think the way to judge it is to just look at the betting markets, and what has happened is Johnson is more likely to survive, less likely to go. And then if you want to just look at most seats of the next general election, Labour were 47% to get the most seats at the next general election prior to last night, and now they're 45%. So it hasn't changed that much, but it's changed a little bit, and it hasn't changed for good for Labour. So there's no way that this can be described as a good night for Labour. They've just lost the Hackney mayor, and I don't know. There's good things and bad things in their results. At the end of the day, it's a local election. But when we look at if you extrapolate the national vote share from it, and people often get carried away with that. Obviously, the Lib Dems are going to be on something like 19%, and they're not going to get 19% in a general election. But Labour are basically 5 points ahead in this election, and 5 points ahead is kind of roughly the centre of where they've been in the polls for the last 3 weeks. So, it's not really progress. It's just kind of ticking along. And don't forget, they are fighting against what many people consider to be the worst prime minister in the history of this country at the time when people have got inflation at 10%, fuel prices through the roof. People are making a choice between heating and eating. The economy's crashed post-pandemic. The recovery is very slow. I mean, if ever there was, after 12 years of a Tory government, if ever there was a time to kick the Tories in the nuts, this was it, and people haven't really done it with Labour.
Okay, there's an awful lot to unpick there. And first of all, I think your assessment of Starmer is wrong. I think that his approval ratings have improved. I don't think he's dishonourable. I don't think he's dishonest. Everyone can pour over his record as Director of Public Prosecution.
Well, on the dishonest, tell me about the 10 pledges. He's been there. He stood on a mandate to be Corbyn's policies, but more professional, and to unify the party. Tell me in what way is it honest, the way he's run it?
But on him calling for Johnson to resign, I think what we need to do is go back and look at when he was calling for Johnson to resign and what he was calling to resign for. And it wasn't just because he was being investigated. There's a whole thing about misleading Parliament, all tied up into that. So that's one thing. The second thing is about, and it comes up fairly often in some Labour circles, is about his leadership campaign and what he said he would do. He was clear that he was going to change the party. The party needed to change.
What do pledges mean? What is that word pledge? What does that mean?
So the pledges now, right? Have we got a new general election manifesto under Starmer? No. Has he actually said, of these 10s, I will not do X, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? He hasn't. There's a real possibility that some of Corbyn policies, they might be changed slightly because times have changed, the situations have changed, but there's absolutely no evidence to suggest.
You're kidding yourself. He's been the pledges. When he whips his party to abstain on things where the pledge says he should go the other way, It's not a question of, well, we'll wait till the manifesto. He's made his decision.
Hang on a second, you see, and that's the other part of it. The membership do not whip the parliamentary party. It's a parliament.
I'm not talking about the membership. I'm talking about the pledges against the whipping. When he whips the MPs to vote in the opposite direction to the pledges, that is ditching the pledges.
I don't think it is, because in Parliament, whipping against something, there's many reasons. Some is because it's stage 1 of a bill reading, stage 2, stage 3, and you're trying to get things amended. So you whip to abstain in the beginning.
Okay, take nationalisation. You think he's doing it because it's stage 1 of the bill reading? No, he's said many times he doesn't believe in nationalisation. It's one of the pledges.
I don't think he has said he doesn't believe in nationalisation for everything. And the NHS is nationalised. So that he hasn't ever said he's going to denationalise.
He stood on a pledge of nationalising rail, mail, post. I can't remember what the other one was off the top of my head.
So the thing about it is, when we
energy.
Right. So anyway, at the moment, there's a huge agreement within the Labour Party, across the entire Labour Party, about a windfall tax. From the leaders grouping to those who people would say were on the right of Starmer. So he has unified in that sense. The second point...
I mean, come on, you are deluding yourself. I understand you're from the right of the party and you feel like booting out the left is good for the Labour Party. You can't say he hasn't unified, then when you're given an example that he has unified, tell me I'm kidding myself when it's factual. What you have to do is accept that in some circumstances he has unified. Okay, I totally understand. There are people who supported the previous leader who are pretty fed up, who are pretty angry. Well, there's 180,000 of them that have left the party. Right. How is that unified?
And how many of those actually only joined under Corbyn anyway, and only were Corbyn supporters? We're a Labour Party.
I'm sorry, I don't really understand. We're a Labour Party platform of unifying the party. I know you don't believe that those people are true members, or somehow they don't count. But they were members of the Labour Party. He said he was going to unify the Labour Party, and he bullied those people out of the party. He's expelled thousands. Under no circumstances is it fair to say that he's unified the party. He's unified the party and thinking he's useless. People on the right think he's useless. People on the left think he's useless.
Well, I don't think that's true, because I think there are some people who are probably to the left of me in the party, and some people will probably say they're to the right of me. I don't use the term left and right in Labour anyway, because we're all Labour, but there are people who would say to me they actually think he's doing a good job. We have to remember that the party suffered an appalling general election defeat. Absolutely disgusting. And that was for 3 reasons. And let's be quite clear about this. It was because...
Well, we know what the reasons are. The Brexit election was a very strange election, and it was lost on Brexit. We had a terrible policy on Brexit, which was a policy instigated by Keir Starmer.
If you think it's just on Brexit, again, you have to
Well, obviously, it's a very complicated election. It was very different in the north to the south. There were a hell of a lot of factors. But the biggest, if you look at the polling, and if you ask people, why did you not vote Labour in this election?
Corbyn's prevarication over Salisbury was a key issue.
Well, you can say that, but there is clear polling that asks people what the issues are that they voted on, and Salisbury was not in the top 10.
Neil, there definitely is loads of polling saying that a lot of voters think it was Jeremy Corbyn. Whether that's fair or not, there is loads of polling saying it was Jeremy Corbyn. He had atrocious approval rate.
What I'm saying is Keir Starmer's got worse approval ratings. But I don't understand how we've got onto everyone bashing Jeremy Corbyn for the 2019 election. The conversation we were having is about whether Keir Starmer is an honest man. When he stands up and says, I'm going to give you the policies of Corbyn and I'm going to unify the party, but I'm going to do it in a more professional way. How is he honest when he's dumped all of that? And don't give me the 2019 election, because that's got nothing to do with it. He's either a liar or he's not a liar. The 2019 election is irrelevant to that.
But it's got everything to do with it, Neil.
Because it's okay to lie because we lost the 2019 election.
He hasn't lied. And any leader who comes in will have to look and assess. We haven't got a general election.
He's a thoroughly dishonest man.
We have not got a general election manifesto yet. So you cannot say that all of the 10 pledges will not be included. I think it'll be absolutely crazy to go in to the 2024 election on the same manifesto. It got us 80-seat Tory majority in 2019. I think that would be politics of the madhouse. So there will have to be.
Yeah, because you believe that the policies cost the election and not the Brexit.
No, I think I think on Brexit.
If you poll nationalisation of the energy companies, it's hugely popular. If you poll cancelling student debt, it's hugely popular.
I haven't said that Starmer is hugely popular. I think there's a lot of work to be done. But on Brexit, on the 2019 election, my view on Brexit there, I think it's a gift to the Tories. I think the Get Brexit Done message played to Brexit fatigue across the country.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
People were fed up with the paralysis of the politics.
100%.
And so therefore, that's the Brexit part of the election. I don't even think it was for or against Brexit at the end. I think
I totally agree with you. That's the first thing you've said that I've agreed with.
So I think that, and the slide that's come up from you, God, there. What Joe formulated was back other parties, 35% Jeremy Corbyn leadership, 19% Brexit. So we cannot live in a world.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is Keir Starmer comes in as a new leader. So Jeremy Corbyn doesn't matter now. Keir Starmer's got a fresh slate as a new leader. What you're saying is that Jeremy Corbyn's policies were unpopular. Well, what this polling says is that Jeremy Corbyn was unpopular. Keir Starmer said, I'm going to give you the policies of Jeremy Corbyn and I'm going to be much more professional and run a much tighter ship.
Right, okay.
It's just a lie. It was just a lie.
I think he said much more than that. I think when a new leader takes over the party, whoever they are, and Corbyn did it, let's face it, they will plot their own way and have their own ideas. And that's why you elect a leader. And that's why the membership elects a leader.
Well, this guy's been given the longest honeymoon period in politics. The first time the press have had a bit of a dig at him, he doesn't like it up him. He's just useless. He's terrible.
Yeah,
every time we run into the electorate, we have a bad night. And everybody makes excuses.
I'm not making
and then starts talking about Jeremy Corbyn because that's all they can talk about.
Bad night. He has no bad night. I said 4 years ago.
I've said that I would like to sing better, and I think we've actually moved forward and we are progressing. Was it an amazing night? No. Was it a good night?
I agree. I don't think it was an amazing night.
I think it was quite a good night if you look at the raw results.
The betting market says they now have a less chance of winning the next general election. And the betting market says that there is a less chance that Boris Johnson leaves this year. So on that method, they haven't had a good night.
Neil, the betting markets are not God. If they were, we'd never back a winner, would we? Everything would be a 101 favourite, right? They made lots of political bets are wrong. Rishi Sunak was 6-4 to be Prime Minister like 2 months.
I understand, but that was on the information that they had available. At the time, they didn't know all the things that were going to come out about Rishi Sunak.
Right, but you could factor it in that it was a good chance that would happen, that an ex-derivatives offshore banker married someone of richest.
Yeah, whatever, but we're going down a slightly different rabbit hole now. You have to accept that the betting markets are a barometer of public opinion and how politics is going. Otherwise, what's the point of looking at it?
Isn't this dependent?
I look at them to find value, to pick winners, right?
But this is also dependent upon where you look. So sometimes there are quite substantial differences between say prices we have and exchanges or whatever. I appreciate they are a barometer of public opinion. I think they're quite a good one in the right circumstances, but I wouldn't take any sort of market moves on Johnson staying as a sort of verdict of any usefulnut on how.
I
mean, they're available to bet on. If you guys disagree with them, you better get stuck in.
Yeah, but also, if I was a bookie, which I'm not, so I'm speaking through as a punter, and a bit of ignorance here, if I thought something like Johnson wasn't going to leave this year, what I'd do is lengthen his odds to get people to bet on him. You know, and that's what I would do. If you're, you know, that's how you build a market, I understand it. You know, you actually make a judgment call on that, and then the money will come in and will change the odds. But the bigger issue on that is this whole thing that Starmer is dishonest, Starmer's this, Starmer's that, Starmer's the other. I think that there's a perception that, and you know, maybe it is because it's what Johnson and Trump and others have spread through our politics, that all politicians are the same, all politicians are horrid, nasty scumbags. And I think there's a lot of people who are now starting to expect the very worst, rather than actually saying, do you know what? He's a bit different. And I think we have to get.
Well, he did a deal to readmit Jeremy Corbyn into the party. He renegated on the deal. He lied about letting him back in, and then he came up with this ridiculous idea that he's going to suspend him from the BLB.
What you're
that
doing,
was just a lie. He lied.
You're putting one side of a story, right? There was apparently, according to.
Well, you think Len McCluskey says he had a deal on the table.
Listen, if you read Len McCluskey's book and take it as a Bible, I can't help you. Because the simple fact of it is...
you think Len McCluskey's a liar and Keir Starmer's telling the truth on this?
I'm not saying he's a liar. I think Len McCluskey will tell his version of the truth.
Well, Len McCluskey says he hasn't had an agreement, they negotiated an agreement, and Keir Starmer lied to his face, and he's gone back on the agreement. One of them's lying.
If you want to talk about Unite under Len McCluskey's leadership...
I don't want to talk about Unite and Len McCluskey. I'm talking about Keir Starmer being dishonest.
If you want to bring in Len McCluskey as your basis of honesty, let's talk about libel cases. Let's talk about cases.
Let's not do that until at least I've reviewed what might be said from either party here, and also let's get to some of those comments, because people have been waiting a long time. I'm sure there will be lots more talk about Keir Starmer in the future.
Well, let's hope not. He's going to be history soon. He'll be a footnote in the Labour Party history.
I've some views on that, but not before we get to the commenters. So just to state hello to everybody, by the way, watching, and thanks for coming on. I think some of you were here last night. Gurney, I have been up still all night, although I did fall asleep about, God, it was 5 a.m. or something. Neil will know, the Welsh caught me. Some of the Welsh might be back, fingers crossed. We've talked an awful lot about Starmer. Are we not equally outraged at Starmer? I can't say I am. But this is more of a position of the fact that, listen, I mean, I don't think Labour should have gone the way they did on the whole Beergate thing, and I think he's in a very tricky position. I actually sort of wonder what people think as to whether he will resign if he gets fined. But I don't think it's the same as Johnson's, namely because he didn't make the rules, namely because he didn't do it 7, 8, 9 times or whatever. Just looking down an awful lot of Johnson and Starmer comments. Never found Starmer is not the Prime Minister. That's from POV Music. Much of the membership despises him. I don't know if that's about Starmer or Johnson. And that'll be interesting to know.
I think Johnson's membership love him, don't they?
I
think it's the same. He's right. If you look at the Con Home table, he's
really they have turned against him recently.
Yeah. He's down there with Priti Patel.
Oh, really? I hadn't seen it recently.
Big mistake bringing in Mandelson back. I actually sort of agree. I'll allow you to have a go back on that later, Tim. But I do think there's some issues with Labour strategy going forward. Algo Fodder is back. How great to see you again back. As long as Labour don't acknowledge and develop an adequate strategy to combat hostile press, they will repeat this argument together. I think there's a lot of truth in that, although it's easier said than done. I'm sure Paul has some views on that. And come on, Will, there are never huge differences. I'm presuming this is about the Starmer-Johnson thing. Right. My view on this, to make it clear, is that I think from what we've seen, both have broken the rules. I'm not going to listen. I'm not Adam Wagner here, okay? So don't start coming after me or whatever. I think both broke the rules. I think Starmer and Labour have worked themselves into a extremely foolish position, frankly. And I think that Starmer's very odd interview with, I think it was Martha Carney earlier this week, was sort of a really unfortunate foreshadowing for getting himself stuck in here. We also were talking a bit about Labour performances overnight, and I think it's very much actually a tale of sort of two halves. The first is England outside of London. The rest of the country, listen, I couldn't say I'm a great fan of Starmer. I'm a great fan of the Labour Party. Gosh, I'd find it hard to crowd their performances in non-England areas, in Wales and Scotland, and I find it very hard to crowd performances in London. But I think it is an issue they need to work on, whatever it is that isn't seeing them make those inroads outside of London. But again, there were some tit for tat wins that, Cumberland, for example, was a rout for Labour. So I think it's a bit more nuanced. I don't think it was a total flop. I don't think it was an absolute barnstorming success, but I don't think it was a total flop either. I think it's very dependent on where you look. And as I've written in something coming out for Start before I shut up and give way, I think the big winners, really the clear winners, were the Lib Dems and the Greens for various different reasons. Anyway, back open to the floor. Do keep on firing your comments in.
I agree with the analysis. Yeah, I agree with that.
Sorry. I agree. I think anyone who says this was an absolutely barnstorming night for Labour really shouldn't be commenting. And I think it's a reasonable night. It's a good night. It wasn't brilliant, but as I said, it's getting us back to where we need to be competitive. People listening to us, people talking to us, and people starting to vote for us. On the Greens and the Lib Dems, I think it's an interesting thing because historically, in Tory Labour seats, in the north, the Lib Dems have been not quite Labour, so the safer option for the Tories to drift to in a lot of seats, and in the south, they've been sorry, got that wrong way around. In the south, they're not quite Labour, so they're safe for the Tories to drift to, and in the north, they're not quite Tories, so people might drift from Labour to them. So there's always been that interesting split that they're going to appeal to different groups depending where you are. And trust me, they're leafleting and messaging. If you go to Lib Dems in Sheffield and then Lib Dems in Surrey, it's like two different parties. I think the Greens is a really interesting thing. And I know the Greens nationally will tell you what they stand for. And they have very strong and firm policies. I actually don't think they know what the people voting for them are voting for. I don't think they're voting for the entire Green manifesto. I think it's this case of what perhaps Neil touched on is everyone's fed up with politics. They're all the same. And Lib Dems have been thrown into that because of the coalition. So you've got this party of the Greens that no one really knows a lot about. They don't get a lot of scrutiny. And it's, let's give the new kids a try. And I think that, I think they performed extraordinarily well. And I think that the one MP isn't a terrible MP and represents their constituency well. So that for me is really interesting. But it's then come a general election, will those votes stick to where they were last night? And my experience tells me that local elections, whilst they can show you that you're winning seats in areas that you need to win seats, that doesn't always translate to winning that seat at Westminster. Now, I would argue further that you can actually work to make that happen, because what you do then, once you win local council seats or local councils, it gives you a platform then to work from, to spread out wider into the constituency, and your Labour candidate for the election then gets more traction and more publicity, etc., etc. So I think it has to be seen like that. But back to who's had a good night. I think I said this morning, that almost every party who took part in these elections will have someone sitting there who will be able to come up with, I think, quite a sustainable line, apart from the Conservatives, of saying, do you know what, we've had quite a good night, and they will point to results where they've done well. And I think that is what happens. I think the only party who can't do that is the party of government.
Can I have a go? I want to have a go at explaining how I see this Lib Dem Green thing. It's a more broader view than this, right? We live in, first of all, politics the last 10 years changed dramatically. It is much more polarised, much more personalised, micro-targeted, simplistic. This mean they're all the same. That it's perfect for our age, right? Now, what that means is that an awful lot of people have literally been trained to despise Labour over a long time. Not just Corbyn, not just Miliband, it's a long time, right? I experience it with my friends in everyday life, people who aren't that into politics, people who just want to think the worst. And what that means is, you've gone into recent elections and there is a vast middle of people who aren't really that political at all, but they know who they're against, right? And that has enabled them the Tories to win a large number of those people over. They turn it into, Labour open borders, Labour's immigrants, Labour's deficit, Labour's bank crisis, all of that. That has broken down. That has finally broken down in the last couple of years, right? People are beginning to blame the Tories. The Tories are now toxic. And so you've got all over the country, especially...
Where are you getting that from, though, Paul? What are you basing that on?
I'm basing it on the very, very poor approval ratings of virtually everybody. I mean, Corbyn had terrible approval. Starmer's got terrible approval ratings.
Yeah, so how does that prove that everyone likes Labour again?
What? They don't. I don't think they do. I'm not saying they do.
I don't think I got your point then. I don't really understand.
I'm saying people are voting on a negative, right? We're dealing in very polarised times, and people are generally voting on a negative. They're voting because this party is responsible for that. These people are responsible for that. These will betray you, whatever, right? And Labour have been on the back foot for a very long time. So it is deeply entrenched. And I encounter this all the time with people who are like, yeah, but remember what happened the last time Labour were in? And I'm like, what happened? What happened? And they're like, well, it was a disaster. Everything went wrong. You're like, no, you lived for 13 years for it. You bought a house and the price doubled. You had a job. It didn't. It's not. Are you really any worse off than you were in that period? But there is that hatred. As I'm saying, I think that the last 2 years, the negativity has transferred to the Tories. So a lot of people who have despised Labour for a long time, but are now not dissatisfied with the Tories, it's not working out for them, and they're looking around for some way of registering that protest, and especially in areas where Labour aren't strong, like in the southwest, in the home counties, the Lib Dems and the Greens are the obvious beneficiaries of that. Now, to me, that isn't an endorsement of Labour. It's a rejection of the Tories, and I think that come the next election, you will see more of that. You'll see more of those people in marginals who are in that middle ground choosing Labour over the Tories as the lesser of two evils. And, looking at recent elections, during the campaign, the Lib Dem vote and the Green vote generally transfers to Labour because they're the realistic choice in that constituency. And I'm looking at that, we've talked before about the progressive vote share, right? That the other day there was a poll, 57% what preferred a government led by Keir Starmer to 43% who wanted a government led by Boris Johnson. That has flipped. We've been through a long period where the Tories and UKIP, for one, like in 2014, Tories and UKIP had half the vote between them. We had lots of small right-wing parties that took up 4%, 5%, 6% of the vote. They're no longer there. The Tories have taken a hard right position. And I think they're entrenched in that place now until they get out of it and move back to the centre in some way, brand themselves differently. I think they're stuck. And I think that they will be seen as the worst, that Labour will be the lesser of two evils next time.
I was just distracted by a couple of results coming in. I don't know how long ago that came in, but Labour seemed to have lost Harrow to the Tories.
That came in a couple of hours ago, yeah.
Oh, Labour were 1-9 to win that, and they seem to have lost 9 councillors to the Tories. Another one I saw where we had a bet, Paul. We bet on Gosport Council to get no overall control, and I only just noticed that the Lib Dems actually won that council from the Tories, which I haven't drilled down into it, but that looked like it was quite hard to do. They had to win
very good result.
A couple of constituents, a couple of wards that had quite safe Tory look about them.
Yeah. They've done amazingly with Lib Dem in those types of seats. Woking, I bet them to win Woking. They've won that. They were, it needed a lot of very big results in generally one-sided Tory wards.
Yeah.
I mean, they are catastrophic results for the Tories, and I think
in Gosport, the Tories lost 7 seats, 7 wards, and the Lib Dems gained 6. So, and Labour gained 1.
Now, if I'm a Tory MP right now or a strategist, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, yeah, okay, we can focus on the Red Wall, right, where things aren't so bad. They're still very competitive, clearly. But the bigger problem for them is what's happening to them in the south and the Lib Dem performance. Because, I'm sure you remember, prior to 2015, it was really hard to see the Conservatives winning a majority because the Lib Dem were so strong in a lot of places. Now they seem to be taking those places back. They've done brilliantly in Somerset as well.
Well, you say that. I mean, don't forget a lot of the Lib Dems pre-2000 and a lot of the Lib Dems 2010 and before areas were, and I know they won Somerset, but they were in the southwest, like properly in the southwest. I'm talking about seats like Torbay, North Cornwall, St Ives, Penzance. They're not winning those seats at the moment. I mean, they in a by-election they'd have a chance. But those seats are, they're pretty Brexity, and they've got the Tories won huge majorities in those seats and absolutely hammered the Lib Dems.
Yeah, and they went into those elections claiming that those areas that the fishermen would be represented by Brexit. They haven't been. They've told them that there wouldn't be any loss in EU funding. There's a massive loss in EU funding. These are places where the cost of living crisis is going to be horrific. The standard working class lifestyle in standard living in the southwest is abysmal. Absolutely.
Well, they might. I mean, I'm not saying they won't win any seats there, but I just think, there's a possibility that Devon and Cornwall has kind of gone for the Lib Dems, and that's not a thing anymore. That's not to say that they haven't got new areas sprouting up. I mean, obviously they've got like Daisy Cooper in St Albans. They've done one in Cambridge in these council elections. They then obviously they've got this kind of yellow wall with a bit of Surrey and all that kind of thing going on, but there's not that many seats in it when you actually drill down and look at them. I mean, obviously, if you think that Tiverton and Honiton, assuming that the Lib Dems were to win that, and obviously the performances in Chesham and Amersham and up in North Shropshire, if you start to think that it's possible to replicate those in a general election, well, obviously you'll have a very rosy view of the Lib Dems. But the real answer is they don't really have the money and the resources to fight multiple North Shropshires in a general election all on the same day.
We agree on that. I do think there's something else at play. I think the Lib Dems do perform astonishingly well in certain by-elections, and they are a by-election machine. I've sort of worked on by-elections where they've been the main opponents, and you come up against Lib Dems in full force, and you're in a battle. On whether or not Johnson has now baked in Tories to a lot of the things he mentioned. I don't think he has. I think we have to go back and look at what happened. So you had Thatcher and Major, then 2001, 2, when May said the Tories had become the nasty party. Cameron set out to detoxify them in 2005. He came into government via a coalition with the Lib Dems in 2010. And I think that obviously damaged the Lib Dems in a lot of their voters' eyes. You know, they're slightly left-leaning voters, or people who wouldn't ever vote Tory now are just saying, well, hang on, if we vote them, is there a possibility that they're going to prop up the Tories again? I don't know whether that happens. I'm not a Lib Dem. I don't talk to the strategists, but one of the things that does happen in politics is there is churn. And I mentioned this morning. The 2019 election was an exceptional election for several reasons, and we won't rehearse that because I don't think people want to just listen to us arguing who's right, who's wrong. But if a seat like Lee in Lancashire or Manchester flips massively in 2019, there's absolutely no reason why it can't flip back in one term, given the right circumstances. Also, I think that if on the whole thing about a progressive alliance, first of all, I think it would be a disaster for any formal pact to be announced, because I think the opposite to that would be a Tory plus right wing alliance, and that would wake up everyone in UKIP, Reform UK, Beergate, everyone would then pile in on that. And I actually don't think that what we're hearing about, there's this huge alliance to unseat the Tories, is a formal thing at all. I think Labour should put up as candidates in as many seats as we possibly can. We should target our resources to where we think we have maximum effect and win seats, but we should have a Labour candidate on every ballot as far as possible. And I think the Lib Dem should do that as well. And voters in the local elections, I think voters actually shown they don't need a formal pact or alliance. If they don't like, or they want to send a message, or they want to vote against something, they're intelligent enough to make that decision and decide who they think is best placed.
What do you think, Wales? Are they intelligent enough in Kensington, in Chelsea and Fulham, in cities, and in Wimbledon? What do we think about that?
Can we just say someone did make that meme?
I was really, it was the best thing to wake up to. Thank you.
I think you'd gone to bed by that stage. We revealed that.
Are those people thick or stupid or just don't care?
No, we revealed that those four constituencies are the four constituencies in the UK where more than 50% of the electorate have a degree.
Yeah.
And if you add together the Lib Dem and Labour vote in those four constituencies, none of them would have a Tory MP if strategic voting worked. And unfortunately, four of them have got a Tory MP because the people that are supposed to be the cleverest people in the country couldn't figure out who to vote for.
You see, well, the thing about that is, I mean, just because you can find a seat where a candidate has, or a party always gets over 50% of the vote. So we can look at Halton, up in Merseyside. I mean, Labour weigh the votes there, and a load of parties could group together and stand against Labour, and Labour would probably still get 70% of the vote. I don't think that makes people stupid. People have different values. People choose different things, and I just think that's one of the other problems with politics, is because you disagree with me, you're a bad person. That isn't a way to win people's minds. And throughout the
I've had that for 5 years. So plenty of people have had that for 5 years, and that's why 180,000 people have left the Labour Party.
Listen, throughout the Brexit campaign, one of the big problems, people who were saying they're trying to stop Brexit were going up and down the country or on Twitter or on news, like calling people gammon because they voted for Brexit. They didn't try to reason. They didn't sit down and understand them. And, I accept what you're saying. Yeah, I think Corbyn supporters probably.
Rachel Reeves said that the 180,000 people that left the party are all anti-Semites. And Rachel Reeves is the shadow chancellor, and not one MP picked her up on it and said that that's a disgraceful thing to say about people who are Labour voters, often lifetime Labour voters.
I think the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn had a huge problem with anti-Semitism, and I'm not going to surrender that point at all. We had a huge problem.
Well, luckily, apparently 180,000 anti-Semites have been thrown out.
There has always been a part of the left, I'll say the UK left, but it's worldwide left, that has an anti-Semitism problem. What happened was it got dragged into the Labour Party. I don't think every supporter of Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semite.
I mean, look, we can have a 2-hour discussion about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, but that's not going to help anybody. My point really was that you're saying that, during the Brexit campaign, some people were vilified and called names. And I'm saying that's coming from right at the top of the Labour Party right now. And nobody seems to care about that. So,
listen, people who supported Corbyn didn't think anything about marching along the streets and shouting at people like me and calling us child murderers or warmongers because a Labour government went.
Okay, all right. So it's fine that Rachel Reeves calls 180,000 ex-members of the Labour Party.
I'm saying quite clearly that in politics, I don't think just sitting there screaming insults at people is ever a way to win a debate. So I think we actually agree on that. Apart from where you come from, you will justify it for other people, but
I'm not justifying it. I never justified it. Did you hear me justify it?
Now the thing about it.
When did I justify it?
No, I'm just saying. You just said, "I don't go back to that," and it's a fact. If we get to politics,
what's the fact? What is the fact?
If we get to politics,
I don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah, if we get to politics, where all people do is hurl insults, call people thick because they disagree with them, because they might have a different view on immigration, suddenly they're a fascist. I mean, they're not. It's okay to disagree, and it's okay to actually have that debate. Now,
but that isn't true, is it? In the Labour Party, it's not okay to disagree. If you disagree on NATO, you're out of the party now.
No, who's been expelled from the party about NATO?
Well, all the MPs have been told that if they have a different view to the leadership on NATO, they'll lose the whip.
Neil, name one MP or member who has been expelled from the Labour Party under Starmer's leadership who said, I disagree with NATO and got expelled. You will not be able to name one.
Well, obviously not, but he literally threatened that was what he was going to do.
No, it wasn't.
Well, I don't know if you're just going to argue that black is white. That's just ridiculous.
I'm not. What he asked them to do was to withdraw their names from a letter that actually.
Yeah, you're obviously clearly forgetting the briefing to the press that they've said that the MPs have to toe the line on the view of NATO. And the Labour Party's always been a supporter of NATO, and I expect my MPs to support NATO. And then he was asked specifically, and what would you do? Would you take away the whip from them if they don't? And he said, yes, because we have to support NATO.
I don't remember saying he would have to take away the whip from them.
It was about a week ago. I mean, it wasn't that long.
And also, it is interesting as well. The MPs, without any real pressure, let's face it, most of them had actually withdrawn from the letter before he actually made.
I wasn't talking about the letter. I was talking about the stuff that's happened since then. He's clarified his position, and he's doubled down, and basically said he's going to kick out MPs that disagree with him on NATO.
He has not said who expelled people. We are a party in NATO. We should be a proud party in NATO. We always have.
He can't take criticism from his backbench. It's fine, I understand, but we're supposed to be. People talk about broad church. Lots of people talked about broad church when the left were in charge. Had to go at the left about it. Now suddenly the right. A minor clique of Labour, like the Blairites, a tiny part of the Labour Party, just because they gerrymander the internal mechanisations of the party, and they've managed to win control of the NEC by gerrymandering. It's
I think that one of the things that constantly amazes me is the power people attribute to Blairites and our ability to stitch things up. But we don't have that power. But the thing about it is that what does happen from time to time is when you have a leader, that people show loyalty to the leader. And I think, I said this earlier, I was not a Starmer supporter in the leadership election. I think he's doing okay, actually. He surprised me how well he's doing. I think he's...
Well, he hasn't surprised me how badly he's doing. I thought he was going to be awful, and he's worse.
We're not going to agree on that. But the whole point of that is, I didn't leave the party under Jeremy Corbyn. I could have done. I voted Labour in every election under Jeremy Corbyn. I didn't have to. I could have kept it quiet and gone to a ballot station and voted for anyone I wanted to. That is what being a Labour Party member actually means sometimes. But we have to get back to what the founding purpose of the Labour Party is.
Whoa!
It's to win elections.
Sorry, I think there's a bit more. You get a bit more personal agency than that. I think. Don't get me wrong. The greater goal. Yes, okay. You want a Labour government. I'm a believer strongly in the idea that the votes have to be earned. I think I think I've seen a lot of it from both sides to each other at various points of people, getting very upset that, Labour members or Labour adjacent supporters didn't vote for Labour in either election or the other. Listen, I know this is going to sound really corny, but part of the whole liberal democracy thing is that you sort of get a choice, right? Like you get to exercise your opinion as you see fit. I don't think anybody should have to feel like they got to vote.
Can I explain that? And the rules of the Labour Party are is you cannot campaign or support a candidate from another party in any election. It's an auto-exclusion offence. So, of course, if someone wants to go to the ballot box and vote the way they want to and doesn't go shout, it's their free choice. I agree with you absolutely. Every vote has to be earned. It isn't. I can't go to someone and knock on their door and say, "Hey, you're Labour, get out and vote for us." We have to give them reason. We have to give them something to vote for. I agree with all that. And all I'm saying about under Starmer, we're getting back to a position where people are actually listening and are willing to say, "Hey, okay, do you know what? You said you're under new leadership. You said you're under new management. I didn't much care for the last lot. I'm going to listen to you." And that's the first step to coming back. Now, that doesn't mean I have to go on the doorstep and attack Jeremy Corbyn, because as far as I'm concerned, on the doorstep, Jeremy Corbyn never comes up as irrelevant to most voters. At Labour Party meetings, there might be a lot of discussion about him. But it's a very different issue. So, and it's all about,
I saw plenty of people this morning saying that any bad results in this election were due to Long Corbyn, despite the fact they were fighting the same seats that Corbyn apparently had a high watermark in 2018. I don't really understand it. The whole thing baffles me. But I do remember that 3 weeks ago, the Shadow Chancellor said that she was glad that we lost the 2019 election because she would rather Boris Johnson be the Prime Minister than Jeremy Corbyn. I don't see how she can remain in her post under those circumstances.
I just haven't heard that. I think Rachel Reeves is doing a pretty damn good job. Shadow Chancellor.
I mean, Google it. It was only 3 weeks ago she said it.
Yeah, I'm just saying I don't recollect that. And
your recollection is very odd, Tim. You remember a lot of stuff,
listen,
but there's other things.
Let's not get into that because so is yours. What your recollection is everything is about Corbyn because people hated him.
I'm gonna step in.
I barely mentioned the man.
Here and sort of bring this down, just because there might be a few comments I don't want to be missing. And
I
whilst
was going to say one that I was really interested in was we were talking earlier before the whole debate kicked off about kind of progressive alliances and about like candidates not standing in favour of other candidates. But the other interesting thing that somebody said in the chat was about kind of what effect does kind of uncontested elections have. So, for example, this time we might be seeing Lib Dems win because we know, for example, this round of elections is much more heavily contested for the Lib Dems. Is much more widely contested than for the Lib Dems than other elections. So 2018, we have more candidates standing this time than 2018. For a lot of parties, more candidates are standing this round. So is it a case of parties are winning because there's more opposition, or is it a case that parties are winning? Do you know what I mean? Like, what effect does that have on the election? I think it's quite an interesting takeaway.
it is. I don't
know the answer to that question.
Somebody say something other than me.
I don't think you can come up with an answer to that sort of on the hop, really. Which might be because I'm seat deprived, or probably just because I'm not smart enough to get it. It's 1-on-1. I'm not smart enough, so somebody else jump in before I go to some other questions, because it is a good point.
I'll come back on another show and talk about what I think is wrong with a progressive alliance, if that helps.
Well, yes, there'll be lots of chances to talk about that down the line. Just going to do a quick scan here in case I've missed anything. Awful lot of talk about the whole NATO thing, including somebody's mentioned Jonathan De Silva. The policy is 2 days old. This is true. It's quite a recent shift we've seen to NATO. And actually, I think we talked about this. We might have talked about this yesterday, how we've recently seen what I would call the young people would call it a vibe shift as regards the place of NATO in sort of British political discourse anyway, in terms of it becoming a thing that people are now expected widely to support. I do remember Starmer saying that was a red line. I think my personal view on it is that I think if you're the leader of the Labour Party, you are allowed to have your own red lines, but I don't think that. But I thought that expelling was going too far. I do think also that this is a problem that the people around Starmer, at the very least, and I'm not saying this as an antagonist or a fanboy of his. I'm neutral here. Labour has a lot of people in Labour have a massive. I don't like saying Corbyn derangement syndrome, but they've got a big problem with not being able to get over last year's. Now, listen, there were big after effects on it, but I heard Laura Kuenssberg describe. It was described to her. She didn't come up with it herself. The long Corbyn thing. And if you're thinking like that, are you ready to get remotely close to government? I don't really think so. I think also there seems to be an insecurity about this that Labour has that I don't think other parties do when it comes to particularly bad election results. Just throwing it out there.
I mean, all I say about Longclaw, and I just don't keep going back and forth with Neil on it. I think that within the party, there's still a lot of anger, and there's still a lot of. I won't sound. There's a lot. There is a real problem, and there's little bits that still remain that every now and again get picked over and flare up and cause a problem. And would I call it long Corbyn? No, because I just don't think it was all about Corbyn. I think it was the party became something it had never been before. I think we moved from being a Labour Party that was a political party, that was main focus was to win elections locally, nationally, regionally, or whatever, to moving towards more of a society, of a friendship society, or something that was vibrant, and it trust me, it was fantastic to see so many new people involved. But
I don't think that was the view of Southside, and I find it frankly insulting.
Well, I'm sorry.
When the Ford report reveals that there were people within the Labour Party headquarters fighting to try and lose the 2017 election. And that report's now been buried forever. The idea that the Labour right are interested in winning elections. They weren't interested in winning the 2017 election. They were absolutely delighted when we lost it.
No. You're talking about a report that hasn't been published yet, a report you haven't seen.
I've read it in full.
Sorry?
The leaks. I'm talking about the leaks.
Yeah, okay. So the leak bit, right, that is now subject to legal action, and that's still going on because it is very selective. Now, I haven't seen what's in it. You know, do I want it published?
I've read it cover to cover, mate, and I can tell you it's very damning for people that worked at Southside.
You've read the entire Ford report, have you?
I've read the leaks. I've read the entire leaks, 88 pages of leaks.
Have you read the entire Ford report?
No, the Ford report hasn't been published. It never will be.
So you're saying, again, we get to this stage, it never will be, because that's another thing that people want people to.
I mean, you can deny it if you want, but there are 88 pages of leaked WhatsApp messages between people that worked in Southside saying that they fought a separate campaign to try and sabotage the 2017 general election campaign. I mean, I guess it's possible that they were all just WhatsApping each other about that, but it wasn't really happening. I guess it's possible.
Or it could have been WhatsApps about talking about defensive seats that have been missed off the national grid. There are lots of things. There are lots of things it could have been about, and I think
I get a bit sick of listening to people on the Labour right talking about how they care about winning elections when they had a great chance to win an election, and they actually went into work every day to try and make Labour lose.
When you say I'm on the Labour right, again, you don't know my politics. You don't know what part of the Labour Party I am. You don't know who I voted for in the leadership election that Blair stood in. You don't know who I voted for in 2010. You don't know, well, I said this morning, I voted for Lisa Nandy in 2015. So when you start just saying, oh, it's Labour right smears, that's a bit like me just dismissing everything you say. Oh, well, he's just a rabid left winger. I don't know that. I don't
think I used the word Labour right smears. I said I get a bit sick of hearing from people on the Labour right that they care about winning elections when people in Southside worked actively against Labour winning the 2017 election.
I don't think that. I think when the full Ford report is published, I hope it will show that isn't the case. I'm not saying, because I haven't seen everything. I saw some of the leaked stuff and I decided, do you know what? It needs investigation, and that's fine. Ford has said that he'll bring it to the NEC, and he will. And there are reasons it hasn't happened yet, as I understand it. And the NEC have given reasons for that.
Right, just quickly before I move this on, because I want to get Torin and Yasnit's takeaways on a few things. At the risk of extending this even further, what were the reasons given for the delay of the report? I only ask because this has been in the pipeline for a very long time, and its release has been long awaited. And you say we have only seen leaks, and I've seen those leaks. We've only seen those messages. Are you aware of any reason given by the NEC why it hasn't been?
Yeah, hang on. I'll just get you up something that
multiple reasons. I mean, like numerous NEC meetings, they've said, "Oh yeah, we're definitely going to give you a presentation of it next month," and then next month is next month.
All right. Okay. In any case, all right. In that case,
March 29th, it was reported by God that the report has now been finalised and it will be brought to the NEC shortly. And that was March the 29th to.
Okay, well, we'll leave that for another day. It's the 6th of May. We'll leave it for another day. And I want to talk to Torin and Yasnit. If actually the Welsh, we'll call them the Welsh. A nice colloquialism will get us all on friendly terms again. Lots happened today, and we've seen the vast majority of results. I'm interested to know your takeaways. Firstly, from Wales, because there were some really big results, and it looks as if the Tories got a proper kicking, and people in that party are not.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, actually, Monmouthshire was, I think if there's any big shock from today, it was the council there moving. Not only did the Tories lose it, but now Labour have the most seats there. I think it was plus and minus 12 between the Tories and Labour. So I mean, it was a big shift. And given that a lot of the Tories in Monmouthshire are fairly moderate, it's a very interesting shift as well. That means now they have no Tory-controlled councils in Wales, and I think that ought to worry them, because I mean the Tory party in Wales has split in two effectively. You have the moderates, and then you have the sort of hardline Tories. And as you well know, we work with the moderate side of the Tory party in Wales, and this is not a great situation for the council there to be splitting. And also just generally, I mean, they've pretty much, they've not quite, but they've pretty much ended up with half the seats that they started out on. And that really is something, because I think it's going to show the Tories, unless they actually change, they're going to be viewed as the sort of very conservative party. And I think in Wales, yeah, you can do a one nation Tory party, and you can do it quite well. But if you're going to have people in the party that are going and drifting it off to the right, then this is what happens. You will lose a lot of seats, because Wales is changing, and it is not going to stay. It's changing. It is moving towards Labour, and it is in some ways moving towards the left. And I honestly think with Mark Drakeford, he is popular among moderates. He's popular among the left. Here, I mean, he's winning seats left, right, and centre today, and honestly, I think there's small pickups to Lib Dem, small pickups to Plaid Cymru. We don't know totally yet. They're small enough that, given the number of seats left in, who knows where they will go. But honestly, the big story is it's gone from Tories to Labour, and I think, yeah, it's got to do with the Tories reforming themselves here, or finding themselves in a position where they do not have many seats.
I think that's really interesting as well. I mean, we talk about them half of the seats, we talk about like minus 67, so they've got 93 seats at the moment, but they've lost 67 since last election, which in Welsh terms is very significant. And the other kind of thing I want to focus on is kind of the Plaid Cymru. They've targeted very well this election. They've only gained 5 councillors overall, but what they have managed to do is they've targeted very efficiently. They've taken control of 3 councils now, so they're on 4. So they've increased their council count by 3, which is massive for them. So it shows, I think, how targeting has been working this election. The other thing as well, so Labour has won 2 more councils, which is really good. But yeah, there's a lot more kind of elections between councils as well, that you kind of see voters now deciding firmly what party they want to vote for. Last time we saw loads of council areas kind of go to no overall control, but this time it doesn't seem to be happening. So you kind of see this kind of re-emergence of local identities in different council areas, which I find really, really interesting. Also, the other story as well is the Liberal Democrats are predicted to lose seats, and they're actually at plus 12 at the moment. So we'll see if that continues as well. But they're doing a lot better than I think people thought they would. So that's quite interesting as well.
Have we got a long time to wait until we get to see what happens in Denbighshire and Wrexham and Conwy, or have they come through and I just missed them?
You can see the map on the BBC, but we'll check.
I think
I've got the map on the BBC, but they've been a bit slow, haven't they? I think, or have they?
They have been slow. Oh,
yeah,
so Wrexham's
is come in.
Yeah, Wrexham
so
is
there.
there.
So there's no overall control. 23 independents, 14 Labour, 9 Tory, 9 Plaid, 1 Lib Dem.
23 independents. That sounds like a lot. What's going on there?
There was a sort of centrist. I think this is where the centrist independent-y group was. So there. So yeah, they have a great logo actually. No, there's a sort of centrist independent group that was standing there. I only know because we saw them a little while ago, and they. I'm not actually totally sure where they came out of. I think they sort of were one of those sort of little local resident sort of groups. And
the other thing as well is that they did have control of the council previously.
Mm-hmm.
So they've actually lost seats this election to Plaid, which is quite interesting. But yeah.
Just because we were having that conversation yesterday about how those northeastern 5 parliamentary seats kind of count as the red wall, but maybe they operate. Well, they certainly are correlated in that they operate in a similar way to each other, but they may not have that much correlation to what happens in the the kind of the red wall, and the way some people think of the red wall, like the north of England, ex-industrial towns.
That's the thing. In those seats that did swing, so say kind of those more in the general election, we obviously saw loads of seats in Wales go from Labour to the Tories, and we also saw it from the Senedd election, the same kind of swing. But it's really interesting that all those seats now are in overall control, right? They're marginal seats that, the marginality has travelled from national to council elections. But
do you think that the reason that they have a chance of moving back to Labour in a parliamentary election, in a general election, is because of the popularity of Mark Drakeford in Wales and the fact that they're in power, or just the fact that Brexit will be a long time behind us by then?
Well, I honestly think as well, like jumping into this, but a lot of those areas, say the north, they have independents that are, sweeping the board. You talk about independents finishing first, second, third overall. So I think that as well, there's this really big emphasis in Wales, especially over the last few years, towards local politics. I think that's something we've seen, especially in the north, in those swingable seats. I think the question is, and I think during the Senedd elections, Mark Drakeford did this perfectly because of COVID, but it was very much of this, right, what works for local people, right? The north we always talk about in Welsh politics is being forgotten. So is Mark Drakeford able to kind of attract them again? Is he able to, one thing we saw in the Senedd elections in particular was this kind of north-south divide and this focus on kind of, policies that help the north of Wales, which is, can Labour promise those again? Can Labour deliver those? So I think it's quite interesting to kind of see. I think you thought this as well, like the north-south divide really apparent during this election.
So I think the other fascinating thing is when you look at, and it's something that we don't normally go into, right? Because we sort of focus on the main party. But when you do go into independence, especially in Wales, what we're finding is that actually, given the choice between the main parties, they'll probably choose Labour. But actually, when you sort of start to look at independent groups like the one in Wrexham, when they actually have that choice of a centrist group rather than voting Tory, they do seem to vote for that independent group or candidate. So it's kind of interesting that there is that swing in Wales again, where it used to be the right, it's actually now the centre, and where it used to be the centre, actually that's where Mark Drakeford has kind of positioned it, and it's because of I think almost a parallel debate about independence that's going on, which is that obviously in the rest of the country it's based on are you left, right, are you centre, whereas here it's also to do with the fact that are you in favour of, say, a federal UK? Do you want, an independence referendum? Are you a Conservative and want to stay in the UK, and so on? And I think that switch has happened as Conservative voters who would have previously have said, no, I'm a strong, staunch unionist, have, for instance, had their kids educated bilingually, as is coming in Wales, and have then shifted towards the centre and gone, well, actually, yeah, I'm probably, if I was to vote, would vote to stay in the union. However, do I agree with more powers for Wales? Probably. But it's interesting, it's that centrist group that's taking over, and it seems some gains the Lib Dems they're making because of that as well. I think but they're very patchy as well. It's interesting as the Lib Dems, they seem to be gaining in some areas, losing in others. It seems very based on personal representations, and how people are doing in their local area seems to have a lot of impact. You'll have seats where, like in Monmouthshire, the Lib Dems I think literally lost all of their seats in the area, and then in other areas they're gaining loads. So it's also dependent on what people think of them as well as that. So yeah, it's interesting.
I think as well. So I was actually looking at chat, and Thomas Dafford said that I don't think any Wales hard to speak to say. Sorry,
okay,
I don't
think
a long
night.
Any Wales seats should be included in the red wall. The dynamics are so different because it's Wales. All my one stayed with Labour at the Senedd, and I do agree with that. I think that during the Senedd elections, especially, we saw the kind of shift again. We saw these northeast seats go to the Tories, and kind of the Senedd we saw them swing back. So I think
also just on sorry to cut across you, but I've been thinking about this for like the last 5 minutes. I mean, obviously in the UK, if you vote Lib Dem quite often, it's not because you really like the Lib Dems. It's a traditional home of a protest vote, particularly in a local election. And you're protesting often against the incumbent, which doesn't necessarily mean, like, for example, here in Ealing today, the Lib Dems did quite well. I mean, Labour have a massive control of the council, but the Lib Dems have given the Tories a bit of a kicking, and they're now second, and the Tories for the first time ever are not even the opposition in Ealing. And that would be quite a standard thing, because people that are Tory voters that want to punish Boris Johnson, they can bring themselves to vote Lib Dem, but they're not going to go and vote Labour quite often. And they might if you live in a Tory ward, often the main challenge is going to be the Lib Dems anyway. I wonder whether the success of the Lib Dems in Wales is more because of the fact that Labour are in power, and a lot of the people voting for the Lib Dems are just thinking, I don't really, I feel like Labour need a little bit of a kick in the nuts or something.
The other thing is, when we talked for the Lib Dems, was that they were very ahead in terms of contested elections, right? In Wales, they were the party that stood the most seats, that was dramatically ahead of other parties. And they've also been very keen on other measures like diversity. So, for example, they've had a very young council groups, council candidates standing. They've had, a very kind of female-orientated gender group standing. I think it's the most diverse party out of them all. So it's quite interesting to kind of see, again, I guess, how are they identifying better with voter groups? I mean, originally at the start of the night, we saw quite a few seats that were only Lib Dem contested winning, so the Lib Dems already started on a positive ground. So I think that's quite an interesting field as well, which is just in case it had more candidates in more places. If you look at, for example, compared to 2018, the party were in crisis here. They didn't, because obviously the coalition had happened, they didn't have enough young candidates trained, but now we're 4 or 5 years down the line, it's completely changed the picture, hasn't it, here, I think?
I think those uncontested elections have helped, and that is one area where I think, the Lib Dems today, especially with Jane Dodds being their only member in the Welsh Parliament and really just clinging on even at that. I mean, I don't think today is going to be a particularly good day for the Lib Dems in Wales. I don't think they're going to say, oh, well, we've done a good job, especially because the Tories have collapsed quite heavily. And a lot of those Tory seats they would expect to go over to the Lib Dems. So actually, to have to rely on uncontested elections and not do very well in terms of just taking Tory seats that should have gone that way, I think it will worry them. And I think it worries them as well because, of course, if you have independent centrist groups popping up and then taking their votes, right, and people are choosing that independent group over the Lib Dems, then I think you suddenly have that thing which is, well, if you're a party and you're trying to rebuild and there are independents that are effectively doing better than you are in certain areas of Wales, then there is I think that's where actually this is probably more a thing for soul searching. I think that the figure really does, it hides the situation, because when you start looking at it with the Tories and everything else, it's not actually a particularly great result. And I think
the other thing to add as well, so obviously we this is our fourth layer of government. So we've got, we're electing our third and fourth layer of government. So we've obviously got Westminster, Senedd, then we've got the county councils, and then local councils are coming in today as well. So they both went on at the same time. But I think it's really interesting that the last election, obviously, we had Senedd and Police Crime Commissioner election. So this was what, last year? And then we had a GE the year before. So for us, it's very much election fatigue. How does that election fatigue come in as well? I think it's another really interesting question. I also think as well that lots of people vote councils based on Senedd elections. So, for example, we've seen here especially is lots of people, as in Aberystwyth, so we're quite a competitive seat again. We talked about it being weird four-way marginal.
Yeah, Ceredigion being a very weird place generally.
Yeah.
So some say.
In all sorts.
You know what? I'll take that. I live here. We're all weird. It's fine.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
About the lowering of the voting age. Has that really been significant? And is there a real buzz about young people suddenly, well, I can go in? Or is it just a process thing that has been announced politically and it hasn't really been much of a thing?
See, I'm not sure. I think the last election was the first kind of Senedd 16 to 17-year-olds that are able to vote. And I think that had a massive effect on the Senedd. I think we saw a lot of kind of, again, more marginal seats, especially young people seats like that. But seats where there's high population of young people, the turnout changed and it went, they were kind of swung in unpredictable ways. We saw some heading towards Plaid, some heading towards Labour, in ways that kind of weren't expected under different modelling. So I think that's quite interesting. But I also think as well that I kind of think it's died down. And we know young people are less likely to vote. I think this election, especially, for example, last Senate election, we saw so many uni students registering to vote. This time, I haven't seen a single university student here go to vote. I think I've seen 2 the whole day. And that something is massive, right? Because we're a university town. Aberystwyth is predominantly students. It's about 40-50% students. So to have that turnout among students is quite shocking. So if that's replicated across the whole of Wales, which honestly, it feels like it is, talking to friends I've got across Wales. I think that that's quite interesting in terms of why aren't 16 to 17-year-olds turning out to vote? Why aren't university students going to vote? It might be because council is a little bit more complex, but still, it's quite sad, isn't it? I think.
Because I think as well, you've got the fact that, you know, there is in some ways, if Labour were looking in a more precarious position here, then I think, yes, you may see an increased number of voters. But I also think that's the thing that you'd layer on top of the 16 and 17-year-olds voting is that actually that it's not like this is a sort of super competitive, country, really. It's not one where the Labour Party is going to be swept out, or even if Labour loses loads of seats, that they will be removed because they're doing too well other than that here in government to actually be sort of removed in any way, shape or form. So it's not really an election that has, I would say, broader implications for the Labour Party in the Welsh government here, simply because whatever happens, I think that they were safe. So, it wasn't like we had Partygate or anything. And so I do think, that meant that 16 and 17-year-olds, they have the ability to vote, and a lot do.
But I think that's the thing as well, like Westminster here at least feels very detached. It feels far away. We everyone knows, for example, that Partygate isn't going to impact us here because we're not voting for our MPs, we're voting for our councillors, right? So I think one thing that people forget about Wales is it's very far removed. I said this about Scotland yesterday as well, but you have, for example, all the main parties in Wales and Scotland have distinct identities. They're very, very different to kind of Westminster parties. So I feel like the results in Wales and Scotland cannot be looked at as, Keir Starmer's success, Keir Starmer's failure, whatever, because people just don't care. They vote for local representatives. They don't vote for national parties. And
it's nicely shielded as well. In some ways, coming here has made me more in favour of having a kind of middle layer of government. Because what it's done is, because you've got that middle layer in between, it's actually meant that we aren't voting here on exactly Keir Starmer, Partygate, etc. We're actually voting on local councillors because there's that layer above us. So, and in Senate elections, it's got enough power that effectively, again, you aren't really having to vote for, Boris Johnson. Whereas I think at the moment with the current system where, some areas you have sort of devolved mayors, but in others, it's basically just your sort of local council, district council, and so on. And in those areas, I think it's easier to say, well, I want to send this message to the government using my vote. I don't think we've really seen that happen here. So, yeah, I honestly think it's the dynamics are different. And I think that in some ways has impacted why Labour's done well in Wales and it's done well in Scotland and even in London, and to some respects is because they've got that extra sort of layer of government, that extra layer that says, actually, it's not just you are voting for your local council. It's not just about voting for whichever candidate is in office.
He persuaded me to move, I think.
Oh, honestly, it's lovely. Do you want to see the sea?
I would say,
show the sea.
Oh, you want to see the sea again? This is like our party trick, I feel, at this point. So there is,
you had me at the sea.
Just outside our window.
So
yeah, I know. So if you so
I'm looking up train times.
Wales, devolved government by the sea. I mean,
only certain bits of Wales.
Yes, this is true. But also Mark Drakeford. So honestly, I think it's a kind of great place to be.
No Partygate.
What is Partygate? I mean, that's but that's the thing. I mean, it's.
I do think a lot of times you hear the parties say, that these are local elections and people should vote on local issues, and you'll hear a lot of MPs in TV studios at the times of these elections saying, in a lot of areas it was about LTNs or it was about litter collecting or about your number of visits from the dustman and whatever. But then they go and I was really upset that Labour decided to put out this thing saying that you'd get basically 600 quid off your heating bill if you voted Labour this week. I mean, first of all, I don't think the sums really add up. And secondly, it was clearly not that kind of election. And for most people, they're not even sending a message. I mean, a lot of people that voted Labour in the elections in the last 24 hours already have a Labour council anyway, because the large majority of Labour voters live in cities. And cities have got a lot of Labour councils, and the people that live in rural areas, are much more likely to vote Tory. As a generalisation, but I think we can accept. And so, for a lot of people, you weren't really sending a message, and so the emphasis on sending a message. I mean, obviously, the government are going to take that message if the Tories get hammered in the local elections for whatever motive the people had for voting. They're going to take the message that they don't really like the government. But I just didn't feel like they needed to say that stuff about your energy bills, because it's just deception, really. It's not fair on people. People are genuinely struggling with their energy bills, and there's no way it's going to change depending on what happens in these local elections.
Sorry, go on, Torrin.
I was going to say, I also think one of the big things that is also forgotten. So in Wales, we have and I will put it in brackets, unitary system. It is not really unitary. We actually have two layers, but it's called unitary, and I'm like, why? Why call it? I was like, unitary means one, but you have two, so I don't understand why you call it that. But we have a unitary system of local councils, and therefore I think that there is a difference, right? Because I think, we have this system here where I think everyone who goes to vote for councillors is like, well, this election matters because it is my local council. Whereas I think if you have multiple layers, you start to get into this position where you're like, oh, well, it's only my district council, it's only my parish council, it's only my county council. And I think that's one of the disadvantages, again, that if there's anything that Wales's sort of system has shown me, it's that I would say less is more in some ways, and that because otherwise I think you do have this problem that people go, oh, well, it's only this, and can you really name all the powers of your parish council? Probably not.
They just got a huge book of ballot papers.
And but this is the thing. I mean, again, I think there's often the frustration, with sort of my parish council of 25 people running, a small village. It doesn't. I think this has shown me, if anything, that actually I'm probably more in favour now I've come here of looking at stuff like unitary councils where I can, because honestly, I think otherwise you do have that problem of people going to the ballot box going, oh, well, it's only my parish council, so I'll basically register a protest vote because I don't know who the candidates are anyway, or, I'll go to my district council and do that. I think that's sort of the unintended consequence, because I think we've got such a sort of, in England at least, a higgledy-piggledy system of local government and that actually I think that's interesting here again, that in Scotland and in Wales, it seems to have been much less about, the Westminster politics. And it also seems to have been less easy to predict what would go where. The polling I find interesting, right? Because I think if you can poll fairly accurately what's going to happen in England, for instance, then that's kind of worrying, because that probably means that they're voting more along party lines than they are for their local councillors, because you're never going to be able to poll who likes which local councillor where, because that's impossible. However, if you're slightly more on the mark polling for which party someone's going to vote for because they generally like it, that's quite worrying. I mean, in Wales, they've not been able to do that as much, but it's still shown that there's a fair amount of goodwill, I would say, towards Labour here, and towards, in a smaller quantities, Plaid and a little bit the Lib Dems, to do with their national image.
Yeah.
But it's...
I think the other thing to think about this council elections as well, though, is that they're new boundaries. This is the first time we've had these boundaries in place, right? So whereas the rest of the UK are voting on older boundaries, we're a brand new, all the boundaries of Wales have been redrawn for this election. And we've kind of as well been seeing the decrease of local seats. And it's very rural communities that have been impacted by these boundary changes, right? Which could explain, for example, this high loss in Tory seats. I mean, we're looking here at Aberystwyth, for example, where a huge ward had just been merged. if you look wider about county, you're on the same thing. For example, seeing like especially like local farming communities who previously had one ward to themselves and now merged with other wards. So that could also explain the decrease in Tory councillors. So I think that's another factor that needs to be taken into consideration as well, which is it the redrawing of boundaries that have been, creating this weird shift? We've been seeing a lot of wards become uncompetitive now as well under the new boundaries. So say, for example, our ward here that we live in, so it's Morfa-Agais, which is an Aberystwyth ward, but it used to be 3 wards, 2 of which were applied Lib Dem marginals, but when it got merged with applied marginal, it wasn't competitive anymore. So no, applied to a safe seat isn't competitive anymore because such a large private majority. So I think that's an interesting question as well, which is actually what impact has the boundary changes had on Wales? Because I'd argue that maybe the Tory loss is partly to do with that.
Because I mean, it's interesting here as well, because the Lib Dem vote basically collapsed, but that was also to do, I think, as well with, not only was it the boundary changes, they didn't basically pick the most popular candidates. So I think that, that had something to do with it. Again, that's the local level in Wales of what happens. But I
mean, I just like when you have like elections and it's like, ones where like candidates vote and they're like, you like obviously see that one candidate is really unpopular because the party for one candidate will get like 500 votes and then the other candidate will get like 100. And you're like, something's happened there.
I definitely saw a few of those today.
Just quickly, Tim, we'll have to go in a minute. So I want just to get his little final thoughts and also to thank you very much for coming on, managing somehow. I mean, you are the only person in this country, I think you're the only person in the Western world who's ever dialed in to a Zoom call, like with your actual phone and stuff. It was magical. Like,
is this
people have now got your phone number?
I didn't realise this was Tim's face. So there we
go. All I know is Tim's phone number. So, but I'm sure. Have you received any calls since then? Since it was,
I've had a lot of calls saying house for sale in Wales. But no, the story behind that was basically I was sitting in the dark room just watching election results, and I wasn't dressed for a call like this.
Fair play, mate. Going away takeaways, like in general, just anything you want to leave us with, and if there's anything you'd like to promote, I guess, because you've been on here 2 nights, drop, get your clout, go.
The first thing I'll say, I'm forgetting who's had a good night and bad nights, who've done all that. I think the narrative of these elections will change massively by the Sunday papers. I think there'll be a recollection of what's really happened as the seats are analysed and people realise and try and map it onto parliamentary systems. I also think there will be a lot of discussion within the Conservative Party, within their constituencies, about what this really means going forward. So where does that leave us? We've got through the elections. I think we know a little bit more than we did before they took place, but I don't think it's really conclusive on where Johnson goes. I still think that, if I had a bet with you, I would say I would go for a new Tory leader by their party conference. However, that's just so many caveats to that for what might happen. But I think if the mayor was saying 270 seats was a disaster, and they've lost 279 seats, then you've got to sit there and say it was a disaster. But anyway, listen, I've enjoyed being on. It is really good clashing with you, by the way, Neil. I find it the whole thing sometimes it needs.
I find the whole thing with Labour very frustrating.
Yeah. So do I. I just think sometimes we need to have these discussions, and I think that possibly 8 times out of 10 we'd want the same thing, but there is that one issue.
There is a market, by the way, on whether Boris Johnson will be gone before the conference.
What price?
The market is actually called, will Boris Johnson still be PM at the time of the Conservative conference? Now, I'm just not sure whether, I guess he has to be on the first day of the conference, the start of the first day, if he's still Prime Minister or not Prime Minister. and you can have 70% that he is and 30% that he is, basically. So, I mean, that one's been, it's been fairly volatile, that one, actually.
Well, and for that to happen, I think what there'd obviously have to be, there'd have to be either he would have to resign, or there'd be the 54 letters going in, a leadership voting of confidence of the Parliamentary Conservative Party. Then there would have to be a ballot where the members of Parliament come down to the final two, and then they would have to have a membership vote and unveil a conference. So would he, would he stay as Prime Minister during that process? No, because once the process started, if he lost the no confidence vote after the 54 letters, he's gone. If he survived,
I believe that during the actual, I think it's a 6-week process, he remains the Prime Minister.
Not necessarily.
He remains the leader of the Conservative Party. Maybe he doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't remain the Prime Minister. Is that right?
Yeah, he doesn't have to. But the whole point of it is that if he survives the no confidence vote, he's safe for another year.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Some people are speculating that he might try and encourage one now on the back of these election results.
Yeah, and that is a political tactic. I think it.
I don't think the election results have been good enough for him to do that, but there's a possibility.
I think it'd be difficult for him to carry out. But so that's where I think we are on Starmer and Labour. I think they'll take a lot away from the results, and so realise it's a start. It's definitely not the end or where we need to be. Anyway, that's me finished. Okay.
Thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Thank you.
Cheers, Tim.
Cheers.
It's just you and me for now, Neil, whilst the Welsh get something.
Welsh cakes.
Welsh cakes. Oh, they're off for Welsh cakes. Wonderful. I'm just going to look through interesting comments from Stafford, and I really hope I've pronounced that correctly, Thomas. He said he really doesn't think that the northeastern Wales seats should be included in Red Wall. I would agree. The dynamics are so different because it's Wales. Yes, I think it's been well explained by Torin and Jasneet. Makes the article in The Guardian recently seem ridiculous. If I had £1 for every single time I'd heard the word Guardian ridiculous in the same sentence or fought it, I would have just so much effing money. That said, I'm going to continue reading the work of Adrian Chiles. I love him very much, and I like his friend. Andy Cairns giving a shout out to his local Worthing Labour team. Labour landed the odds in Worthing. They were 5-2 on with us to be, I think, the first time they've won in Worthing, I believe. Yes.
I think in 2015 they didn't have a single Labour councillor.
No.
And yeah, I mean, basically they've been exactly what Andy says. It's been a kind of a local organising project that's been going on for 7 years now, and it's come to fruition today. So you got to take your hat off to them. Yeah, I mean, obviously some of it's demographic change. Lots of younger people have moved to Worthing from Brighton because Brighton's become gentrified and more expensive, and Hove as well. And that's changed the dynamic in Worthing slightly. But if you looked, it was one of these places where they did a third of the wards, and you could see they needed to win 2 wards today to take control of the council. One of the wards, the 2 easiest ones in terms of majority, were 52 and 300 and something. And the one that was 300 and something was the Tory leader of the council. And they managed to dislodge him. But they got more than that. I think they got 2 other seats as well that were like larger majorities than 300. So they did pretty well. But, they have had a hell of a lot of organising over the years. They go out knocking every week. There's a lot of activists on the ground there. And it was basically the Labour left. They've had visits during the campaign. I think Rachel Reeves has been there. Keir Starmer's been there twice, I think. And God, that's bad. I've forgotten her name. The MP for Tooting, the young lady who's a doctor, Alan Khan.
Yeah.
I think she's been there a couple of times. So they've had definitely some sort of big name front benchers there, but it's definitely been a sort of organising success, really.
Absolutely. Have our Welsh friends left us?
It looks like they have, doesn't it? It does look like they have. They've devolved away from us.
Alrighty. This has been absolutely amazing. I'm going to give 5-10 minutes ish for.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you were going to give me 5 out of 10 for my.
God, no, Neil, you've been outstanding. You've been absolutely outstanding.
I'm quite tired actually now. Andy says he's still here.
And Andy is still.
I think he wants us to carry on. I'm not going to carry on. I could do with eating some food, watching some television that doesn't have John Curtis on it, and I may even have a glass of wine. Try not to think too much about the Labour Party. We didn't even get onto the Hackney mayoral election, did we?
I'm going to check who won that.
Lutherama won it. Yeah.
Wasn't it Tower Hamlets?
Sorry, I meant to say Tower Hamlets. I've done that twice today. I said Hackney. It's virtually the same place, but it's not the same place.
But by the way, explain something to me, just because I think you might have a better understanding of it. But a lot of people on the shitpost left, right, seem to want everybody to just, suck up and deal with it. The fact that Luther Rahman's one, but the guy's like a proper fraud, isn't he? But isn't he about it? He's a proper fraud. Why?
I don't really know enough about what happened. He got banned for 6 years. Was it to do with the postal voting or something?
I think so.
I'm not really sure, but what I do know is that Absama Begum, the MP in the area, suffered domestic violence from her husband, who's also one of the councillors there, and then one of his friends or something reported her to do something. She was living in a council house when she left him. They tried to say that she used some kind of I don't want to say something wrong that gets me into legal trouble here, because I can't remember the exact story, but basically I think the implication was that she had done something dodgy to get a council house using her power as an MP. And I think the police got involved and there was a court case and she was found not guilty.
Nobody.
But there was some quite vitriolic and nasty stuff that went on within the various members of the Labour Party in East London. And I think the guy who lost today in Tower Hamlets was a supporter of her husband. So a lot of people on the left kind of felt that this was a chance to kind of get even over the way she was treated. She's very popular on the left. I think there was an element of that in the campaign today, and that's what I've seen some people tweeting along those lines.
Fair enough. That would make sense. Yeah, she was. I mean, not going to get too into it. She was appallingly treated by the party. Now I remember this is coming back. There was no support, as in less than no support for a supposedly professional organisation. Anyway, moving on from that, I will be around for about 5 more minutes. So give me your questions, please, before I do go. By the way, thanks.
I mean, in terms of Paul's point about the betting, I mean, obviously he's right. I don't think every political betting market on Betfair or with the bookmakers is perfect at all times and correct at all times. And obviously, if I did, I wouldn't have any bets on them. But I do think when there's an election and the market moves, a few ticks one way or the other, it moves because that's the market making a judgment about what happened in the election. Now, the market could be completely wrong, but the market has very clearly made the judgment today, given that Boris Johnson was 2.2 2 days ago to go in 2022. and he's now, I haven't checked while we've been speaking in the last 20 minutes, but where is it? He's now 2.78. I mean, 2.2 to 2.78 is a considerable move in a three-way market. You wouldn't get a move like that in a football match pre-kickoff. This is obviously a lot more volatile, and we don't really know the true price. Whereas with football, we've got an Asian handicap to compare it to and an Asian market. And Paul can say, well, I think that's a mistake. It's moved too much. But I think it's hard to argue that Boris Johnson's chances of going this year are worse today than they were yesterday. I think he's kind of escaped these elections. Lots of people like Paul. I'm not going to dig into Paul while he's not here, but Paul, has made the case several times on Polling Station in the last 3 weeks that something that could bring down Johnson is a disastrous result in the local elections. Now, he hasn't had a great result in the local elections, but it's clearly not going to be the thing that brings him down. He's not going to wake up tomorrow and say, do you know what? That extra 43 council seats that took it over the 300 or whatever the number ends up being, I can't even remember what it is now. That's the straw that's breaking the camel's back. I'm going to resign this morning because those 3 councils in Worthing, I couldn't sleep thinking about them. It's just not going to happen. He's basically survived another potential trap. Now, that's not to say he's going to last the year, but he's slightly more likely to last the year than he was 2 days ago. I think it's hard to argue against that. The other thing is we talked on a pod recently about 2023 as the departure year.
Yeah.
And because, it's almost a bit Brexity, isn't it? There's 2 camps on this. Will Johnson go this year? Will he not go this year? And they have strong views, these camps. Every time it moves one way, it moves back the other way. There's lots of people that seem to think he's certain to go in 2022, and they hammer the market. And then something happens, and suddenly a bunch of people come in and hammer that he's going to last until 2024. Nobody ever seems to hammer him going next year. The sort of general consensus is that if he manages to last until the end of this year, well, that's it. He's there for the election. And, obviously there could be an election in 2023, and he could lose that election and have to quit as leader. But we're looking at about 85% now, 80 to 85% that the election is in 2024. There is a school of thought that if he gets through this year, they can plot over the winter. The economy starts to recover post March. They have the spring statement in March, and then they get rid of him. Get somebody else in middle of next year, ready for an election in May 2024. 2023 as a leave date, I think it touched as high as maybe even 7.6 on exchanges, just quite recently, like a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even 10 days ago, something like that. It's 5.2, 5.6 now. So that has been a move in from kind of 6.0, 6.2 just in the last 2 days. So I don't know. Do you think that that's become more likely, or do you have any views on that? Are you a Johnson goes this year man, or a Johnson will survive man?
I used to be Johnson goes this year. I used to be that fairly strongly. I said it on the previous episode of the Polling Station. Now I'm probably more leaning towards Johnson survives, but I wouldn't want to take a really strong view either way.
I know the things are not at all connected, but whenever people say, oh, this will get him, this is the thing, I just can't help thinking about Teflon Donny.
Yes.
We had 2 years of hearing, oh, God, we just need to wait until, and there was a whole stream of them, weren't there? All the, various national security advisors and whatever. And he's going to put his book out next week. He's going to be up in front of the grand jury next week. That'll be the thing that finally gets him. It just feels so much like that with Johnson, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah.
In my mind, it wasn't even, I wouldn't have even taken 100 to 1 that the local elections was going to be the thing that brought him down. I don't really think Partygate's going to bring him down. I think ultimately, if he goes before the next election, it will be the steady accumulation and lots of backbenchers suddenly thinking, do you know what, we can do a bit better than this. My seat is at threat now. And there's another person over there that makes me more likely to keep my job.
Yeah.
But until they see that person, they're going to stick with Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, just 2 points to add on that. Firstly, quite a few Tory MPs, right, they either believe this or they've been told it or coerced into it, but quite a few Tory MPs owe Boris Johnson like their position, which I think is which is like a major, I think it's a major factor in sort of like the parliamentary numbers, like for or against him. Just regarding the local elections thing, I see the thinking behind that. I don't think the thinking behind that was terribly misguided, but I think it needed sort of more momentum. You know, everything was separate.
Given that everyone immediately dismissed the claim that the Tories could potentially lose 800 seats, how was he going to go? Like, I mean, maybe if he had have lost 800 seats, that would have been enough. But I don't even think that would have been enough.
I don't mean by him like losing 1,000 seats in a night or something. I mean, because you have to remember, like, it is only May. I don't think it was the most far-fetched thing, right at like the height, say, of Partygate, to look at this date in the future, whatever, and think, this will build into something with like momentum. It will all become eventually too much. I don't think that sort of thinking was like completely misguided. I think it made sense in theory, the whole thing. I believed it at one point. I believed it'd be the thing it was doing, but I didn't think it'd be the thing on its own. I thought it would just probably, on the back of several other bad things, sort of be a straw that broke the camel's back. But then you sort of remember that the guy's a sociopath, and that the party system and stuff and such is all just set up so that, you know, he doesn't have to go unless really there's an entire sort of revolt against him. And now I have to be honest with you, I don't have a clue at the moment when he'll go, or when the backbenchers will sort of turn out and force him to go. If that makes any sense. I've got like no clue.
Anyway, look, they're here now. Don't say anything more about them. Oh, hi.
Sorry,
actually, no. It would have been really funny if when you came back, we were both speaking in Welsh. That would have been really funny.
You know what?
We would have been like, Dioch.
But just to do that joke, we'd have both have to have learned Welsh, and I think that would have been a little bit of a
would have been a stretch
for one joke.
So our camera broke, and then I got an event in a bit, so I had to get ready.
The worst bit is our camera didn't break. Zoom was like, oh, suspicious activity, and I was like, was that me not using Zoom for 2 months and then staying on all night? Like, could that have been like the?
Will was quite upset because he thought, you know, I wouldn't have been that surprised if they'd have just left while Neil was having some kind of meltdown earlier. But he said, basically, I was just sitting here talking very tranquilly, this is Will saying that, about, you know, Boris Johnson, and they've stormed out on me. Unbelievable.
Like, no, Will, we've had enough.
We were just about to wrap up, really. Did you guys, I mean, obviously it's a local election, so that means that nobody ever talks about the results in terms of how it affects people locally. They only ever talk about the results in terms of what it means in terms of any future general election or the leaders of the parties, because let's face it, that's the only thing that's fun. Who cares about who cleans up your bins? I don't know. I mean, in the battle of the spin, obviously it's not a battle between the Tories and Labour over who's won this election. It's the battle between the Labour left and the Labour right over who won the election. That's the only battle that ever happens in politics anymore. Where does the truth lie? Did Labour have a good day in these elections? Good night, good day.
It's a weird one, right? Because as ever, it's a more complicated story than I think spin will ever. I mean, obviously, you know, Labour's going to say they did well. Tories will say they didn't do as badly as they thought they would.
The Tories is quite easy. I mean, they didn't do as badly as people thought they would, but they did pretty badly. I mean, that's
the question also is who was setting those expectations, because it was also the Tories themselves.
No, but I'm not talking about the 800, but I'm talking about, you know, given, unless you're like a hardcore Tory voter, most people in the country and a lot of Tory voters think that, you know, Boris Johnson's been a little bit out of line with the Partygate stuff, and that the cost of living crisis is a serious thing, you know, that we need to all be very worried about. And given those two things, you know, hanging around in the background of this election, the Tories would take this result, wouldn't they? I mean, it's not the worst result ever. So they haven't done too badly, really.
I think they will certainly take the result, but I think at the same time, that was probably cushioned a bit as well by local councillors, and especially as we saw in London with sort of local Conservatives. So I think it's difficult because, and this is where it becomes more nuanced, is, you know, you have places like Wales and Scotland acting very differently to what councils in England are doing. I honestly think, and, you know, if we're looking at sort of the wider what happens now, you know, what would the results really mean? It goes back to what me and William were talking about last night about the Labour Party and the Tories and finding what they actually want. And this is going to be their fundamental kind of problem, which is, you know, it is true. If this is all that they have to put on the table to say, this is who we are as the Labour Party, this is who we are as the Tories after the whole get Brexit done, then it's not looking great for either going into the next election. So I think really now what this has shown is if you play on the field as either, you know, the Labour Party in its current form or the Tories in their current form, then the reality is people either have to pick between a party they don't trust or a party where they're not really sure where they particularly stand in the form of the Labour Party.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I agree 100% with that.
That's where I think now we have that really interesting position, which is, you know, this should in truth be a wake-up call for all the political parties. For the Labour Party, it needs to be a wake-up call saying, look, you need to decide what kind of left-wing or centrist party you want to be, and you need a clear message about what you want to do. You know, being the party of working people, or whatever other slogan.
Well, clearly they don't want to do that. They want to distance themselves from unions, so that's not happening.
I mean, to be fair, that was actually just their slogan.
Sorry. Yeah, they talk about hard-working families because they don't like to talk about. They want to distance themselves from dull scroungers and all this kind of stuff, don't they? I mean, obviously, I'm using these expressions not because I think that they're great expressions to use, but I'm using them disparagingly against the Labour right, as in everything I say.
But I honestly think, right, that's where Labour needs to have a hard think about where it goes and how it portrays itself and actually decide what it's going to portray itself.
But they briefed the press today to say what this election has taught, or one backbench Labour MP has briefed to say what this has taught us is that we need to go out more to try and appeal to 45 to 50-year-old single white male in Brexit territory. I mean, I don't necessarily think that's the lesson. In fact, I think that isn't the lesson.
I think the question again, though, is like, what form does that take? Right? Because
they just think more flags, more bigging up the royal family, spending on military, police, talking about locking up criminals.
The thing is, it's more substantial than that. And I think that is what the Labour Party has really failed to do, right? They think that the way to get across to the electorate, what they stand for, is to basically pinpoint certain issues, make a fuss about them and go, now you understand where we lie. And that's not really, I think, anymore how it's worked. Because, you know, obviously if the Labour Party wants to portray themselves as left-wing, okay, they'll go off and they'll start talking about public services loads and, you know, like the NHS and so on. I think it's more substantial than it's trying to find out, okay, so, you know, it's basically finding your core message. And that's what the Labour Party hasn't really been able to do. And I can't even find it for them because I'm not sure what it is right now. You know, it's that core message, that core self. How are you going to get voters to you? You know, it's all good. The Labour Party will go, oh, we want to track these voters. We want to track those voters, all these voters. But it's, you know, as much as like for the many, for, you know, not the few, and those kind of slogans, they were, yes, okay, they ground on me by the end of the election campaign, and I didn't want to see another poster ever again. But you know, it's finding that core message that they want to put forwards, and I don't think they've done that. They've just said, oh, we want to attract these groups of people. Well, that's great, but you've actually got to be able to attract them. And it's the same with the Tories, right? What are they? Are they, you know, are they trying to be like, you know, let's get rid of public services? Are they, you know, let's have strong public services?
They're definitely having that battle, aren't they? Because there's plenty of people in the Tory party that you know, this was the whole Rishi Sunak project, wasn't it? That many people in the Tory party saying, you know, Rishi Sunak is being, you know, held hostage by Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak turns around and says, no, we can't spend money because we have to balance the books and all this other nonsense economics. And you know, with, you know, austerity basically and all that. And Boris Johnson, because he doesn't like to disappoint people, would always turn around, you know, because essentially he's a child. He would always turn around and just say, you know, oh, we've got to give the money to these people because they've come and asked me for it. And Rishi Sunak would start giving him the stuff about, you know, we've run out of money. I mean, obviously, that's not possible, and that's all nonsense. But, you know, partly why a lot of people on the Labour right wanted to get Sunak into number 10 and out of number 11 was because they felt like he couldn't operate in number 11 effectively with Boris Johnson, you know, splurging the money. And that, you know, Tory people that I know would say Johnson's not a true Tory because he's not a Thatcherite. You know, he's blowing the budget.
It's interesting, right? Because in a lot of ways, if Boris actually, in a funny way, he summed up during the 2019, I think it was, election campaign, what he actually thought his version of conservatism was. And I think that it was really not covered. It was something that was like, I think it was just literally in an interview. And he starts talking about this idea of, you know, stronger public services and free markets. And, you know, and I'm like, oh, okay, you're going towards centrism there. And he keeps on talking about it. And then suddenly after that interview, never speaks about it again, right? There is a clear thing in me that says Boris is a sort of centrist Tory who's then drifted to the right. And that's the problem that I have, which is people brought into that idea at the last election, and now it's changed quite a substantial amount. And again, that's the thing, it's finding that core message. The parties at the moment, you know, Partygate, I think, will be history soon. You know, we will come to the next election.
No, I agree. I actually don't think it's that much of an issue to people. Paul thinks it really cuts through and it counts, and it's the sort of thing that can win an election. I just don't agree.
I think it's something that will have impacted council elections to some extent, but definitely not general.
I also think it depends where you are in the country, right? So you look at the southeast, you're looking at voters who, again, like I think the further away you are from Westminster, I generally do think there's a bit of a disconnect from Westminster. So say, for example, like people who are in the north or in Wales or in Scotland, they're not going to see Partygate as a massive thing, I don't think, because...
Well, plenty of Tories thought that the rules were stupid anyway.
Yeah, I think you can look at the southeast, though, especially. I think, having lived there for most of our lives, I think it's very different. I think it's, you know, political and the cultural politics really permeates in the southeast just because of its location to Westminster, just because loads of people, you know, commute into London every day. We're looking at these kind of, you know, where the Lib Dems are succeeding. It's all of these areas, you know, Surrey, where people, like, again, travel to London every day. You know, all of these kind of, like, and also they're much richer areas, they're areas where people talk about politics a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that Partygate has kind of influenced voting behaviour there because it's something.
You're right there. I agree with you there, but that's another one where Paul, I think he takes it too far. He thinks that there's this massive blue wall in Surrey that's going to collapse the Lib Dems. When you actually break it down and look at the constituencies, yeah, they might win Esher and Walton, they might win Guildford. They're not going to dislodge Jeremy Hunt. You know, there's just not enough where it's less than 20,000.
Let's put it this way, Esher, they don't even think they're going to win, really. So, I mean, it's literally, honestly, right, the fact at the moment is, you've got the Tory blue wall there, but especially, like, I mean, I'm in the east of England, so not quite the southeast, but I mean...
Wokingham is another one that's got, there's a bit of a shout there against John Redwood, but, you know, it's still only a bit of a shout.
it's that thing. I mean, we've been mentioning it all the time, but I think with the Lib Dems there's two core things. The first is we'll always say, oh, well, they don't have enough money to fight elections and stuff, other than by-elections in a general. The one thing is it's not about money, it's about activists.
Yeah.
So in North Shropshire, where they won, they were immediately like running around trying to find people to run offices, and oh my goodness, we've just won. What do we do? That's going to be their big issue, right? Which is,
no, I agree. I totally agree.
You can get money, you can find it. I mean,
Well, they're actually on the money side of it. Obviously, the Tories get way more money than the other parties, and obviously Labour have a big problem with money at the moment. They are essentially skint. And they're facing, all kinds of problems. They've had this huge data leak. Lots of members have had their data compromised. There's a class action suit going on against them, and that potentially could bankrupt the party. But just on a more day-to-day level, the reason that they're doing this kind of non-aggression pact with the Lib Dems is literally because they can't afford all the lost deposits in these small places. Where they can't really win, and they rather than just admit that, they're pretending that we're having sort of secret talks with them. It's just nonsense. But actually, I thought of something else that was kind of a funny kind of dichotomy. This whole thing about voter ID. Now, obviously, we all know because we talk about this nonsense all the time. Voter ID is it's a Republican thing from America that's come in. It's a way of voter suppression. And the way when the bill went through, the old age pensioners are allowed to use their bus pass or their train pass. One of the Labour lords, I can't remember who it was, tried to say, well, hang on a minute, what about student rail cards? Oh no, no way, you can't have that. That's a completely different thing, which is obviously ridiculous because we can see why they're doing it, because older people vote Tory and younger people vote Labour, but if Labour are going to make their whole pitch and appeal to go for the red wall older male in order to win over switchers, because that's generally the kind of Blairite mantra that you can only win elections by pivoting to the centre and moving switchers to your cause, and you get 2 votes for the price of 1, and trying to get people to vote who don't usually vote is a waste of time. Well, then they don't. I don't know why they're getting so in a flap about the voter ID. They don't need those young people anyway. They don't want. They're not going to vote for them anyway. They're not offering them anything.
I would honestly say there's a lot more young centrists. Ironically, I'd say that than I think people realise as well. Because at the moment, we have this situation. Yeah, okay, young people didn't go out and vote, and of course, you had the sort of Corbynite style thing. But I think that Clegg almost caused Corbyn in a strange way, because I think had Clegg gone through with tuition fees, I don't actually think that you would have ended up in the same situation with Corbyn becoming so popular on issues like
it moved a whole bunch of people of a certain age to the left in very rapid time, for sure.
I also don't think it was necessarily a permanent one. I think it was that the centre offered them nothing. And then that was the point at which they went, well, okay, I've had enough.
I hear what you're saying. I have a theory. Let me test it on you, and you can tell me whether it's a terrible theory. Because you are correct. If you look at people aged 19 to 24, they're much less left-wing than people aged 25 to 40. Which is kind of weird, isn't it? You would think that
I think that's
be the case.
So, for example, me and you.
I have a theory. Tell me if this is a terrible theory. It's to do with the age at which you leave home. If you ask people how they vote and how their parents voted, you'll find that people that still live with their parents are much more likely to vote the way their parents vote. But people that have moved out from their parents are much more likely to forge their own path. Quite literally, because they're forging their own path in life. And maybe that's the demographic of person, the type of person that moves away from their parents at a younger age is more independently minded, and they're more likely to vote the opposite way to their parents. Whereas the kind of person that stays into their late 20s, early 30s living with their parents is less of that mindset. Is there anything in that, or is that just a nonsense thing that I made up?
It's a yes and a no, right? And I think the sort of red wall, blue wall stuff really shows, in some ways, the opposite of that, which is when people continue to vote for their party, even if not just if they left home, but they've left their area entirely. And, you know, say in the people who've moved from the south to the north continue to vote Tory, or the other way around. So I honestly think, again, it's that unfortunate answer in politics, which is it's very, very complicated in the sense, yeah, there are some people who leave home, you know, and then they get a house and then they go, oh, I'm going to be a Tory and my parents were Labour. Or there are some people that, you know, leave a rich home, used to vote Tory, then end up, you know, homeless and then will vote Labour, for instance, right? It's a complete extremes, but that's kind of the thing. So it's quite complicated. I would say the only sort of the bigger data that seems to have been done on it about, and it's been focused mainly on red wall, blue wall stuff, seems to suggest that people carry their vote with them. Yes, some people change, but for a lot of people, they carry that vote with them, even if they move to the complete other side of the country, completely different places. You know, they will still have that same vote as they did before. So it's interesting because it does show that there's, you know, yeah, there's definitely some people who swing their voting intention, but in general, it just seems to be that people who are voting that way for any length of time, you know, after a few elections, their situation will change and they'll still vote for the same party. But I think that's because over time they build in those good connotations of a certain party. You know, they'll vote Labour and they go, well, they helped me, or they, you know, they'll be rich and they'll go, oh, but actually, you know, why shouldn't I pay a little more? I mean, in Cambridge, that's like a big thing is, oh, I may be wealthy, but can I afford that increase in tax? Yeah, you know, or it's the other way around. It's the one of the big things the Tories did actually in my area that sort of is very interesting. So I think it kept people with the Tories is having those sort of working men clubs that they have where, you know, the people who live on the council estate can come along to the Conservative club for a few hours and they can feel like they're part of this, you know, much higher, you know, greater thing of all these rich people. And you know, it's that same kind of a thing, right? They managed to keep those voters there who may not necessarily be the traditional voting base of that party. So I think because of that, parties have done a particularly good job of keeping people alongside and actually keeping people voting for a specific party despite their circumstances changing. And that's where, yeah, there's some change, but I think it's, for the majority of the time, it just seems to stay fairly the same, which is also why I don't think politically the map's changed a lot. You know, over time, yeah, sure, you know, we've had shifts to Labour and the Tories in different areas of the country, but really, when we look at it, yeah, okay, apart from the Liberals in, you know, early 1900s kind of thing, switching to Labour, which was really because the Liberals fell apart over the issue of free trade. Other than that, and yeah, you've got the blip of sort of the SDP coming up and then really just ending up merging with the Liberals again.
Well, in 2015, the southwest of England went 100% blue, whereas it had always been split blue-yellow.
I mean, that, though, is to do as well with the Lib Dems. I think 2010 Lib Dems versus later on, you know, I mean, I know a lot about Lib Dem Eurosceptics because, you know, and at the end of the day, right, if I was living in somewhere like Cornwall, and I know a lot of people in Cornwall who used to be Lib Dem voters who went, actually, I don't really consider myself much of a Tory. However, the Lib Dems actually on this issue of the EU have moved away. And actually, that's where they started moving. So they I think had a very different image of what the Liberal Democrats were as that sort of Liberal Party, the one that was like calling for a referendum on the EU at some points, you know, doing all these kind of things, you know. I think there was one, I can't remember which leader, it was something like Charles Kennedy literally walked out at the fact that they weren't having a referendum at the House of Commons. So, you know, the fact was the Lib Dems changed too much for the Southwest, but you know, but in that sense, I think other than people moving around the country, and yeah, some very specific changes like that, which I think genuinely was one issue triggering an area to move away from the Lib Dems, I honestly think that actually, in general, people don't really seem to change their vote a huge amount, and it's why also it's hard for new parties to get in. You know,
I've got on that subject. I have one more. I need to go because I need to eat some food, and we don't want to do another 12 hours. But
Oh my gosh!
I know you said to me at 5:30 we're going to come on for half an hour. There's a concept of the pivot point in terms of age. Like lots of people will say that as you get older, people become more socially conservative as they get older, and they become better off economically, and therefore they tend to move from left to right on the political spectrum. And the pivot age for that to happen is something that gets recorded every year. I haven't actually looked at it recently in the last 2 years. But I believe between, I'm going to probably get this wrong now, but between the 2015 and 2017 election, I think the number came down from like 53 as the average age at which the majority of people in the UK voted. It was equal between the majority. It's equal at 53 years old. If you find a 53-year-old, it's 50-50 whether they vote Tory or Labour if you pick a random 53-year-old. Whereas if you pick a random 52-year-old, it's slightly more likely they vote Labour. And if you pick a random 54-year-old, it's slightly... So the pivot point was 53. But between 2015 and 2017, that came down to 47 from 53. Like quite a big drop. You'd think it might come down like the odd year here and there, but it came down 6 years. And of course, the reason that if you thought about it and thought, well, why is that happening, is because of home ownership. People are much later in life to get home ownership. So the average age, and generally home ownership is the main correlation between voting Tory. And there's a huge correlation between owning your own home and voting Tory, which is obviously why Thatcher brought in right to buy. And why Boris Johnson wants to sell off the housing association stock. But that number's gone back up again now. And it went back up between 2017 and 2019. It went up like 3 years in a year. I just thought at the time that the constant moving down of that number would ultimately cause the demise of the Conservative Party. That was my optimistic hope one day. But I feel like that's not happening now. And I wondered why that is.
It's because everyone sees it as this single graph with one point in the middle where it moves. And what actually I think has been interesting was when you take that to the extremes and start looking at the older age groups, especially during the referendum, you realise that they started backing Remain or Labour or so on, right? So it's also a lot more about waves, and different groups of people moving through that have different effects. So different generations will. But I also think, home ownership definitely has an impact. There's also the joke, about one of my relatives who was a staunch Tory until he turned pension age, and overnight was a Labour supporter. There's definitely some of that in there, as interesting as it can be, where people will switch over as they kind of grow older, and they'll sort of lend their vote more and more to a particular sort of political party.
So I was just laughing. I like to drill down in polls. I always love it when you look at a poll and you find there's like 1% of the people that were Remain voting UKIP voters and stuff. What the hell is going on there?
But the other thing as well is that for those voters, a lot of the time, they will be people who've either maybe changed their mind, or they are nationalist, but were basically were worried about all the economic impacts of Brexit, right? So that's the other thing is, I think it seems funny until you drill down into, as someone who previously would have been supportive, wasn't old enough to vote Lib Dem, but supportive of the Lib Dems, but was a Leaver. I can very easily go through and explain how that happens. But it's the thing that if you look at it in the poll sense, we've got such a fixed view of like, Remain block and Leave block, Tory block, Labour block, right? Anyone split, switching between the two, you go, what? But reality reality is that actually, because it goes from hard Remain gradient over to, Leave or whatever, actually it's fairly easy to switch. We just have this thing in politics and in general life about just having to view things as these big blocks. You're either this side or that side.
Don't you think that the blocks are solidifying a bit more? The country generally is becoming way more polarized, and obviously we saw that with the Trump situation in America, where his approval ratings are very low, but he's a very popular politician. The people that love him really love him, and the people that hate him really hate him.
So great.
And Brexit has kind of borne out of that kind of feeling, isn't it? People have very strong fixed views on either side, which obviously, if you then look at the new Labour strategy of saying, well, we're going to bet the farm on, getting people to change their mind. Do you think people are less likely to change their mind in politics today than they were 20 years ago?
I think we've created the situation, and I'll tell you why, because during the referendum and I would say just after it, there are a load of polls done about, okay, which option would you sort of pick? And you had a sort of mixture between sort of hard Brexit, sort of a softer Brexit, or, like Norway, or would you choose to sort of rejoin or remain in the EU? Norway won basically every time. Now that I find interesting, right? Because we were told during the referendum, oh my goodness, everyone's so polarized and we're all really split between these two positions and everyone's in these big monolithic blocks. You ask the public and actually it turns out, nah, they were basically in the center ground on that debate. They were very much in favor of the Norway option. That's what I think is particularly interesting, right? Which is, I think, in politics or sort of political circles, we almost are, I think, very on the idea that, politics is solidifying and it is turning into these very, very big blocks. The reality is the political system is turning into those big blocks. You've got these, the big Trumps and the Bidens. Reality is, if you ask the voters who don't, without having to say, oh, well, you've got Remain or Leave, you pick one, right? If you ask them, what do you actually want? If you said to them, do you want a moderate candidate? Do you want Trump? Do you want Biden? Well, yeah, you probably get the moderate candidate out of those. However, if you don't give them that choice, then they're not going to be able to choose the moderate. So if you don't give them the moderate choice in Brexit, and you say, okay, well, if we are to leave, what do we do? Do you go for a soft Brexit or a hard Brexit? And then people probably choose a soft Brexit. But we don't give them that choice. And because we don't give them that choice, we go...
It was pretty tight with Brexit, especially that a majority of MPs were pro-soft Brexit. So the fact that if they were presented as a hard Brexit versus referendum, or a hard Brexit versus second referendum, or hard Brexit versus, no Brexit, like, I actually think that was...
Well, I mean, ultimately, when it came down to it, though, the most Remainy MPs gambled on, reversing the result when they could have just taken a soft Brexit, really.
This was what kicks myself. I mean, we have both spoken to members of the independent group after. I kick myself every time because of the fact that at the end of the day, right, they could have gone out there and they could have gone, we want a soft Brexit, all of the rest of it. But what they went is, we have to be more Remainy than the Lib Dems. And I'm like, because they did this thing where they went, and in some ways, this is the left-right Labour debate all over again, but in a different form, which is we have to basically try to alter ourselves based on what the other person is doing, and in reality, it's that thing, right? If you view it at the moment, I mean, the Labour debate is a bit weird because they're not, the new Labour isn't really moving towards the centre. And they've kind of moved to this really weird authoritarian kind of, strong on law and order position.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a Labour Party.
And I sort of ask them, like, where are you guys? Like, what are you actually, what are you doing? And it's the same thing, which is like, the independent group could have gone, okay, we're going to do something slightly different and go for soft Brexit. And that, I think, would have actually gained them a load of votes. There's a load of people. I mean, I remember both of our families, same kind of positions where, oh yeah, if they back something like a soft Brexit, then I'd vote for them. They seem interesting. And I think what they thought was they saw this big surge in support. People really liked the idea. And then, unfortunately, they said, this is what we want. And as soon as they started going, okay, we want to remain, and we're sort of weirdly like pro, we're weirdly in favor of sort of like, people having to vote and sort of then, strong public services, but not quite because we've got Tories in us. And we want a social market economy. And I went, oh my goodness, yes. And then they start going, oh, but let's forget that. And let's talk about some other. And I'm like, so that's the reality of it, which is that the independent group had a big chance to break through. And the reality is it really.
I never really believed that. I mean, mostly because they're fundamentally, a lot of those people are just not serious people. I just think they're quite poor politicians, and they had some really bad people on the roster.
They did, but I think in terms of success. I mean, I talk about success in politics because at the end of the day, I don't really like any party, which is quite a good thing because it gives me no real horses in any.
I don't really like any party either. So,
but
probably for completely different reasons.
Well, I was going to say probably, yeah, but I mean, but the point is, if we're looking at what, how could have you made the independent group successful, right? They had that bump of support at first. So there was definitely support there that could have gone to them. The fact is that they genuinely did.
I mean, they had one good poll, basically, didn't they? I mean, they didn't really have any support.
I'd say they had a few good polls. I mean, the thing
and they hit 18 one day, and then they thought that was real.
But I think the thing is that genuinely over time, if they'd actually, because really the polling collapsed when they started jumping into policy and they started doing crap logos and
also whenever they were actually faced with people having to put a cross in a ballot box, that was really where it went wrong.
That happened after they picked their referendum campaign and the fact that they were going to go be pro EU and all the rest of it. That happened well before any crosses got put in ballot boxes. I honestly think if they played it more by actually what those voters who were interested in them would have gone for, I think they could have actually built a fair amount of support under them. But and that's the thing, which is like, if they'd done that, I think, with things like a soft Brexit, social market economy style, and they'd actually gone down that route. Yeah, they weren't the best MPs. They weren't people that I'd jump at. But if they'd done some decent branding, if they'd done some decent policies, I actually think that I don't know what exactly would have happened, but I think it would have been far better than the outcome they ended up with.
Well, I mean, the people that basically liked them, they already had a party to vote for, the Lib Dems, and they weren't, the Lib Dems weren't really doing that great.
But
I don't think the MPs that were in the Lib Dems were particularly worse than the MPs that were in the Change UK. I mean, they were all pretty bad, but yeah.
The Lib Dems have more. Again, this is where it comes to sort of niche Lib Dem voter issues. But the Lib Dems have a lot of internal problems that I think there was a lot more appetite to go, let's start from a clean slate and build from the ground up. Even in the Lib Dems, there seemed to be quite an interest in doing that from people who were, in the Lib Dems. So again, I think, Jazz almost got poached by them, but it's by Change UK.
Oh, yeah.
But you're like, what? But there's the point. So they tried, and unfortunately, I genuinely think they could have built something, because there were a lot of disaffected Lib Dem voters who didn't like coalition. There were a lot of disaffected Lib Dem voters who were soft Brexiteers in those Cornwall seats. At the end of the day, you win elections by being more popular than the other people, not by being a popular party, right? So that's where I think, yes, they didn't have the best MPs, but I think actually, given that opposition to the Lib Dems went and they lost places in areas like Cornwall and Devon. I think that Change UK would have had an opportunity, not necessarily that they would have done it, but they had an opportunity there that they would have had to snap up some of those seats on we are like the Lib Dems, but we are soft Brexit and we want this sort of social market economy style thing. Vote for us. Now, I think a lot of people in the areas like Cornwall would have looked at the ballot paper, they've gone, I could vote Tory, Lib Dem or Change. And I think a lot of those Lib Dem voters wouldn't have stomached going with the Tories, and I think they would have gone Change instead. But when they had no choice, they had to go to the Tories. It's again this thing of politics being more gradient than it is big blocks, and I think that's...
You got to go.
We could. I don't know.
What was that?
We've been on here for ages.
I was going to say, I feel like I'm just doing a political commentary of the UK.
No, it's good.
Right?
I like it. I'm enjoying it, but I really do need to eat something, and I haven't had a drink of water for at least 4 hours. And, and Will told me this was a quick half an hour roundup, and then he hijacked.
When you said that, I meant that you could just jump in and out. That's what I meant. People can come and go. Like an election show. I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm sure there's some people still. Maybe there's some people still watching. Let's have a look.
Actually,
they'd probably be upset if we go.
Too interesting.
10, including Algo Fodder, Andy Cares, and Jonathan De Silva and James Bridden. Legends, all of you.
Thank you for watching us.
You've heard all of our political take. Literally, there's nothing else. Like I have no other political takes to give at this point.
Well, if it's anything, this is firstly it's going to be available to watch back on catch up, and it'll be very, very, I think, informational for many people. And also, I think, if people can vote with their virtual feet, and they have.
Actually, somebody in the chat, Dennis in the chat, said that I'm in the UK. Can you give me the link so that I can come on the Zoom and join in? We could have done that as a prize, Will. Maybe next time, if we have a quiz, we can let the random punters in the chat come. There we go. Algo's got his hand up. He wants to be involved.
And this is
she. I don't. Sorry, Algo. It could be a he or a she. I'm not familiar with the name Algo. For me, it sounded like a guy's name, but it might not be.
Thank God for the name.
We're just sort of looking at that, going, well, let's
I don't know anyone called Algo. I do now.
In all seriousness, just a couple of notes to wrap up. I will go back and I will look at the chats to see who got closest to was it English Council Games or was it?
Oh, by the way, the fifth constituency with 2 universities. It was Cambridge actually. I checked it. Yeah. So there you go.
Okay.
There was Cambridge, Sheffield, Hallam, Canterbury, Leeds North East, I think it is, and what's that other one? Ceredigion.
Yeah,
that was the 5.
Don't you just love Cambridge? Our weird traditions of punting.
Daniel Zeichner, isn't it? Is that
I've met Daniel Zeichner, and it was on a school thing, and I was quite bored actually. But that wasn't to say that he was boring. That was just to say
he was 100% bored.
Oh, I see. Algo Fodder tells me that this is obviously not his birth name, his or her birth name. It's Algo Fodder, as in
to be consumed
by algorithms. How did I not think of that? I was just thinking Algo. That's a fairly unusual name.
Yeah, Dan, that was the first thing on my mind, was consumed by algorithm.
Whereas I was starting to think that half the male population was called William these days, but.
We can't. You're going out William tonight. There's William there.
What do we have? We had 5 people on, 3 of whom are called William.
I will plug one thing actually.
I want to see think right.
Have a plug away. There's 10 people left you can plug it to.
We should get all the Wills we know and just make a William feed. That would be quite fun.
Honestly, Neil, you are great, but you need to work on not talking right over people who are saying something.
Who said that?
Algo Fodder.
Algo. You got told off by Algo. Probably. You're probably right, actually. I don't know. There were certain periods when Tim was talking where I just had to stay silent. And today I thought, no, I'm just not going to engage. I'm going to go mental in a minute. And I sat there in utter silence for what felt like quite a long time. And I thought, we're going to wrap this up. It was like a half an hour thing, and I'm not going to have spoken. And I'm quite happy with that, because otherwise I'm likely to fly into some kind of rage. And then Will went, "Oh, Neil, did you want to say anything?" And I just thought, yeah, maybe. Maybe honestly, I can think of 100 things. Watching you guys, if there's anything that in our stuff about getting an independent complaints body. If there's anything that convinced me, it was watching you guys today. Like that, there was nothing less convincing or more convincing, I should say, than that. Like it's the Labour Party. I mean, God, I'm happy I'm not.
Yeah, but it's such an unequal power battle, because Tim gets to run the campaigns, run the by-elections, decide on the budgets and whatever, and I just get to donate money and come and push leaflets.
You poor thing, you end up like me. Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't really donate money.
I don't do that anymore. I'm certainly not going to be doing any of that anymore. But because they basically spat in my face for that. But I feel upset by it. But I think for good reasons. I mean, I think I might have said 4 times that the Shadow Chancellor said there are 180,000 people that left the party were all anti-Semites. He didn't at any stage say, "Oh no, I'm sure she didn't mean that," or "I don't believe that." I mean, he might have been nice of him just to say, "I don't really believe that," but people on the Labour right just think that's true.
To be fair, I heard that comment a few times. I actually need to look it up and read the full whatever was said, because I have no idea. So
she said she was glad that people had left because we didn't need anti-Semites.
I mean, they're saying what? I mean, it depends whether, because it's 180,000, right? If on the one hand she said, "Oh, I'm glad people have left," if it depends how it's phrased exactly. If it is phrased as basically, "I'm glad anyone who's an anti-Semite has left."
Well, if she wanted to clarify to make her sound not so bad, she had plenty of time to do it, and she chose not to. So and she also in another interview, which Tim managed to miss that one as well, within a week of that, said that she was quite glad that we lost the 2019 election because she didn't want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. Well, people have been expelled from the Labour Party for much less than that. You are supposed to, as a member, campaign and well, certainly vote for your guy. And I would have thought the least you would want from the Shadow Chancellor is that they were hoping the party would win the most recent general election. I mean, I don't know. These people are so vitriolic and bitter about the whole right-left thing that they'd rather have Boris Johnson. I mean, I don't know. I voted for Tony Blair. I voted for Gordon Brown. I mean, I don't agree with him on everything.
But again, that's the reason why we need PR.
Yeah, of course. I agree. I would like
into
PR.
The circle again.
Yeah, I would like PR. Of course, they can have their financially and morally bankrupt party, and the left can start something else up. And
also be financially bankrupt given the way that political donors are going these days.
Well, obviously the Labour Party with the left in resurgence was pretty good from a money point of view. It did very well.
That's interesting. I'll make this my final comment. Otherwise, we'll keep.
Go on. Yeah, go on.
My final comment is it'll be interesting if it did ever split, because obviously you have those Labour people who would have continued donating as big donors and stuff that would have donated. Whether they would have, it'd be interesting whether they would have donated to a left wing sort of party, or whether they would have voted to whatever continuing sort of centrist Labour Party there was. So that's the thing I always find interesting is. That's one thing that's not talked about in PR, right? Is everyone jumps going, "Oh my goodness," you get all these new parties, but also there is the financing issue and the fact that how financially stable would those new parties be, because you never really know where donors are going to go. My experience of donors is it's very tricky to tell. Like
2015 to 2019, Labour basically didn't have any 6-figure donors. So they became the most financially sound that they were in the whole history of the party.
They don't really need, like, the one thing is in politics generally, it's not necessarily the 6-figure donors that actually matter as much. It is more those donors who are willing to give you the odd
continually every month
sort of tens of thousands figure is that's the ones that interestingly matter more. Although again, that becomes hard to find, because obviously you've got the fact that under election rules you can really only see the people who donate above a certain.
Well, it's all. I mean, that is a massive can of worms, isn't it? Because obviously, you've also got donations to individual MPs. You know, I mean, Jess Phillips raised 61,000, I think, for her leadership campaign. The crowdfunding page was still up. It might still be up now. It was up a week after she pulled out. I never read where the money went. I mean, where did it go? I mean, she said, "Oh, I'm not going to be in it anymore." There was certainly no talk of like paying all the money back.
She went,
but I mean, you know,
wow,
that happens all the time.
Nice.
She probably would tell you that she used it for political campaigning within her constituency, which doesn't mean leaflets and knocking on doors. That means fighting against deselection by using, you know, members of her staff, paying members of her staff to do political work, you know, ringing around her members to make sure she doesn't get deselected or something like that.
I honestly think
jump on the deselection express.
Hmm?
I guess you didn't want to jump on the deselection express.
Well, yeah, of course. The deselection express, which, you know, managed to deselect 0 MPs in the Corbyn years.
That was a pithy joke. It was like
it was. I remember the thing. Yeah, it was quite funny. The little trains and everything. Yeah.
I think
anyway, look, it's time to go. It's time to go. I need to eat some food. Will came in drinking a beer. He didn't offer any round about an hour ago. I mean, the whole time since I saw that beer, I've been thinking, I fancy a beer now.
I'm drinking Iron Brew, which is very much for the Scotland side of this, which we have discussed less. So
made with girders.
Probably.
Yeah, very good. Well, it's very nice to meet you guys, and I mean, hopefully, well, I don't know, Will might get you on a future polling station. We used to have lots of different guests, but now it seems to be just me, Will, Paul, and Johnny, which is fine because Paul and I just kind of grr at each other about his centrist Labour views, and you know, he thinks I'm some kind of nutcase probably. And then occasionally we agree on a bet.
And so yeah, me and William have been on a few things before, but normally it's sort of Will Barber Taylor and his podcast and stuff. So you know, we've done stuff before, but obviously I'm always happy to come on stuff like this.
Actually, I liked the other Will that came on last night. I feel a bit bad actually because I felt like we weren't engaging him in the conversation enough, and then suddenly he left. Whether he had the right hump.
No, he's just a quiet.
He's
quite. When he did speak, he had quite good things to say. I was kind of thinking, I wish I'd have shut up and let him, you know, say a bit more.
I'll remind you that next time we do something like this.
I'll tell him that.
He seemed quite clever though, and I thought I looked up his podcast. I'll have to have a listen to it. Really. I'm looking at the comments now.
Right. Yes, I did ask for some questions so I could answer before.
I got Henry. I haven't got any tips for the football. The football's all virtually finished, hasn't it? It's nearly 9 o'clock. Are you thinking about tomorrow? I hadn't really thought about it. I've been busy. I've been doing this the whole day. I only came on for half an hour.
Right, I'm just going to have a look through these because I'm going to probably nuke the stream in a moment or two.
Good thinking.
By the way, 13 of you is still here, and just my heart goes out.
14, it says on my thing. 15, it says. Jumping up by the minute. I'll tell you what you could ask people to do. If there are 15 people there, there's only 13 likes on the YouTube page. And it helps in the algorithm to get it seen by more people if everyone ticks like. It doesn't take 2 seconds. Also, if you can also hit subscribe and subscribe to Star Sports, and then more people see this stuff. It doesn't cost anything to hit subscribe either. You just press it. There you go. Well, why do you not do that? You're supposed to do that. You're supposed to be a professional.
Because I'm about to do it, and then
yeah, right.
I'm getting cranky now. I need to. Right, anything of interest. By the way, do all the stuff Neil said. God, you can be up for a job next.
There we go. We've got one extra like. One person was listening.
The power of the internet. Anyhow. All seriousness, what an incredible couple of nights it's been. Huge thanks to everybody who's helped set this up. In case,
well, that was you basically. You're just thanking yourself.
Well, actually, I had a bit of help with this, so thank you. Well, thank you, Neil, for coming. Thank you so much. And thank you.
I'm not 100% sure I'm happy I came, but it's been nice to meet the Welsh people.
Yes, and thank you very much to the Welsh people who have human names of Jasneet Samurai and Torrin Wilkins.
I mean, to be just a brief point. I don't want to have a go. Maybe this is
we try and end it.
When you invited Tim,
and then it's like, oh, just a brief.
When you invited Tim, Will.
Yeah.
Couldn't you have just had a look to see if he'd blocked me on Twitter before you thought, oh, he'd be a great guy to have a chat with me?
Check if someone has blocked someone else on Twitter unless he logs into your account. In which case, I am wondering how William got his,
that's a good point.
Password.
Well, he could have said to me, can you have a look at this guy? Is he all right? And I would just say, well, he's blocked me on Twitter.
Yeah, but to be fair, if you had to clear everyone with everyone else, by the
true.
time you've done that, you wouldn't. It would be halfway through election night, and you'd only just be setting up. So
somebody complained actually in the chat. I don't know whether you missed that. Somebody did complain at one stage. I don't know whether it was today that it was quite male heavy, the panel. I don't know whether you.
Thank you for being our token single. It's literally.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we did well for the token woman, but no, I don't know. I mean, did you not think about that, Will, or did you struggle to get
the left of the
else?
Labour Party is really doing well right now.
I was just saying, it's always a thought, isn't it, when you have a panel that you should try and balance it if you can.
In terms of the political things, honestly, not really. Not really because of a couple of things. Firstly, this.
I don't know why I raised a new subject.
Can I just say that, and as both of us are here from Centre is fairly opposed to quotas. So our answer, I think, jointly would be, nah, not really.
Okay. Oh, well, that's fine. I
also think in general, though, with politics, women especially, people at council elections, what we're looking at now, 30% of candidates being women. So it's just hard to find people.
Yeah, it is.
I know loads of really mouthy left-wing women that could have come on and given Tim a right mouthful. He wouldn't have enjoyed it very much. I wish I'd have thought of that. If I'd have known he was coming on, I could have got somebody really lay into it.
I feel like this has turned from an election thing into left versus right of the Labour Party, and I'm just sitting here as a centrist going, guys, this from the outside, honestly, independent bother anyone,
I can't believe you followed politics as carefully as you guys obviously do, without realising that everything is about left versus right in the Labour Party, and nothing else.
Of course, the entire political system is, completely. There's nothing else there. It's just
that is basically the truth.
People in Wrexham who decided to go for the centrist party, they were also thinking about the Labour Party and left versus right.
They definitely were.
They chose the centre, which is good. The centre outside the Labour Party, that is. But
marvellous. Right, I'm gonna go because I'm actually I'm feeling quite upset about Will's beer, actually.
Can we just say how in meme news before we go? Meme news, and the Lib Dems have 69 councillors in Wales, which I think is just.
I think if they stay at that score,
there's only one more council to declare. They probably won't. They'll probably stay at 69, so that will be.
Wow, Lib Dems, act classy.
Absolutely.
Sums up their party, really. No, anyway, so that was a joke. To any listener, it's where the view count just drops to 0 suddenly. I think we should leave it there, shouldn't we?
Yeah,
it's been fun.
It's a good place to leave it.
I've enjoyed it a lot, anyway. Apart from the bit where Will decided to ruin my evening. Lovely.
Oh, someone put in Scotland, would you be pro-indie? That's an interesting question.
So I'm not getting no more interesting questions. Lovely to see you all.
We support a referendum, but not necessarily independence. Thank you and goodbye. I
voted for Plaid.
I mean, it'd be fucking hard not to be given, imagine if you're a Scottish person, you had to deal with all the shit Britain inflicted upon you, or the English mainly. Let's be
You've watched Norway use its oil well, and you have none left.
Yeah. In all seriousness, though, if you think about it, even sort of somebody who has a relatively mild political temperament in Scotland would have a lot of reasons to at least consider it. I am just not terribly surprised that at least 45% of Scottish voters are at any one time thinking of leaving the union of the cursed, rainy, turf, fascist island, or whatever kids call it these days. You know, but in all seriousness, if I was this Scottish, gosh, I mean, I'm English, and I have to go to jail for saying that, so we're going to wrap this up soon. But and I see the bloody.
Oh, that's really cute. Thank you, Henry L. That's funny, but no, I mean, I'm afraid she's mine.
This is a bit better than the guy who came like yesterday, and it was like 3 a.m. and I had to be nudged to sort of remove him from chat because he was getting all weird with it. And why did I say that? Sorry, right. Anyway, some thank you notes. I don't know who will hear these, but I want to say thank you. Just in case you're listening. Adam Russell, lifesaver, teaching me how to set up a stream, worked brilliantly. David Stewart and Joseph Troney for putting the pages up at very short notice. Everybody who's appeared, Torin, Yasni, everybody from the centre, thank you so much, especially for the support. All of you for watching. 3 hours and 28 minutes, and you guys are still here, and that's amazing. And
thank you.
And
thank you, Will, for hosting.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Indeed. In all seriousness, your comments and everything have been amazing. Please, stick around. There'll be lots more to come. We have Australian elections. We have French elections. We also have Brazil coming later in the year. And the US is not going to be a million miles away as well.
I fancy French elections. Because I get to talk about the centrists there. Well,
indeed, the centre is really right in the thick of it, of course, for the French parliamentary elections. So hopefully we'll have, I'm sure we'll have politics and all those for you. We may well do something like this in the future. We might do a couple more live shows, possibly if we get enough interest in them, because for all that it's taken about 3 hours. No edits required, no uploads required, which is actually quite a remarkable thing. So, by the way, if anybody's here and you've enjoyed this, we have lots of stuff like this. Just simply search, go to our Star channel. You can click on it. There's a playlist called Politics, and all the Polling Stages episodes are there. Jasneet and Torin will have you on again. I don't know when we'll next be around, but it should be sometime next week. And after that, I feel sad I'm ending this now, which is ironic because I've wanted to do that for like the last 30 minutes since you guys stopped with the analysis of where he really stands in terms of political spectrum. But now I'm a bit sad at having to feel like I'm ending it. But I'm afraid, unfortunately, must be done. So
you need to come on again for the Northern Irish, though. You need to.
Well, yeah. I mean, that could be something.
Was like, oh no.
That could be something we do. But I am off tomorrow. We'll see. We'll see. We'll give it a.
Do a roundup episode, maybe.
Yeah, round episode, because Northern Ireland's elections only 30 seats counted, by the way.
But if you keep going, I'm going clubbing tonight, so I can do it in the club.
Yeah, just like
I like this. I like the idea. Outside broadcasting to the max. By the way, we will have some. Oh, get me on for any Scottish chat, Will. Yeah, listen, we're looking into expanding the amount of people we have on the program. Maybe live shows are a better way to do it. I'll have a think and have a chat. But in all seriousness, this has been a pretty incredible ride. In about 2 hours or so, I think I'm going to die. So I will probably, gosh, well, that's a tip. I'm gonna cry looking at it. I'm trying to get it in shape. But in all seriousness, thanks very much, Jasneet, Torin. Thanks very much, everybody, for watching. You know where to find all of our other stuff. And of course, starsports.bet/politics for all the latest political betting odds. And suggest markets, suggest stuff for us to price. We can only say a polite no thank you if it's not suitable. We try to get everything up. And with that, I'll bid you farewell.